Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, Robert Meyer Burnett. I invite you to watch and listen to the Designing Hollywood podcast, brought to you by Martika Ibarra and the great, legendary Hollywood costume designer, Marilyn Vance. I am afforded the wonderful opportunity of co-hosting the show. If you are interested in the magic of Hollywood, the design of Hollywood, the clothes of Hollywood, watch the Designing Hollywood podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts from, or find the video version on the John Campea YouTube channel. That's right, the Designing Hollywood podcast. Why would you ever want to miss it? Especially if you love the movies.
Observations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
I've heard it said before, like, it was a very smart man named Robert Meyer Burnett who said the currency of our current age is authenticity. And it's so true.
Imagination Connoisseurs Unlimited, in association with Road to Perdition writer Max Allan Collins, brings you True Noir, the Nathan Heller casebooks, starring Todd Stashwick as Nathan Heller, once a Chicago PD officer turned private eye to the stars. Nathan Heller gets involved with all kinds of real-life historical events, even though he's a fictional detective. Look out for the 10-part audio series being crowdfunded at the internet somewhere near you.
Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of science fiction, and, of course, cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and the perhaps never-to-be-defined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I'm, of course, Robcasting from the Robservatory, Robcasting at you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity. This is Robservations episode 947. Now, I'd like to point out that something unusual today, just for today, but it's very cool. This episode of Robservations is being sponsored by Phoenix Productions and their project Cancellation Part 1 and 2. Cancellation Part 1 and Part 2 is a script novelization where a mysterious secret organization and company manufactures smart televisions that do more than record and play television shows. These smart TVs actually make judgments on humanity based on their viewing habits. Who or what is behind these smart televisions? Part 1 and Part 2 are created by James D. Watkins, and you can find them at www.phoenixproductions.com, just like it says on the screen, or you can go into the description for this show and find the link. Cancellation Part 1 and Part 2. Very interesting. Anyway, that said, I have to say I kind of hate presentism. I really, it is irksome to me that humanity has such a rich, interesting history. But it seems like today, when people are talking about where we are, where we've been, where we might go, everybody wants to look at everything with the prism of today, as opposed to the thousands of years of struggle that brought mankind where we are here today now. Now, are we perfect? No. As I've said on this show many times, we're horrible. Human beings are horrible. Nobody can degrade and destroy and devastate more than we can. And we have the power to do it more so than we've ever done it before. And that is true. but we're also wonderful and beautiful and unique in the cosmic infinitude of the universe. So give yourselves a golf clap for that. But I find it strange that we live, especially here in the United States, certainly an imperfect place, but one of the most free, equitable, wonderful situations that any civilization has ever had in the history of humanity. Now, of course, it's difficult to maintain. As I said, President Andrew Shepard in Rob Reiner's, and happy birthday to you, Rob Reiner. Rob Reiner's The American President talked about democracy in the movie The American President and said, you've got to want it bad. And it seems like not a lot of people want democracy these days for whatever reason. And one of the things that I've always liked about science fiction, fantasy, and horror as a genre is it's pretty open-minded. The great thing about science fiction, fantasy, and horror is that because it's giving you the delicious exterior of fantasy, science fiction, and horror, sometimes the interior, which is intellectually stimulating and challenging and may contain ideas that you might not necessarily like, but within the context of sci-fi, fantasy, and horror, it's like, a spoonful of sugar. It makes that medicine go down, doesn't it? And I think that that's important. And one of the reasons that when I grew up loving shows like The Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, and Star Trek, a lot of the people that were writing those shows, who, by the way, did not grow up with television because it didn't exist yet, they were people of books and letters, and they learned storytelling from classical places. And as I've said before a lot on this channel, my friend Dan Coyle will probably agree with me, that a lot of the writers today that are writing our sci-fi, fantasy, and horror grew up on Joss Whedon shows, like whether it was Buffy and Angel or Dollhouse or Firefly, and they have a certain way of approaching writing that, quite frankly, is rather irksome to me, especially when it comes to Star Trek, and never more so apparent than the season 5 debut of Discovery. And I'm not going to review it now. I did it yesterday on a show, but it's a show. Star Trek Discovery is a show that does its very best to try and be anything but Star Trek, and yet throws in this sort of idea of what Star Trek is supposed to be without really understanding what it's supposed to be. But that's for another day. But anyway, what I wanted to talk about was Dune. Dune 2 is still tearing up the box office, and it's being puzzled over and looked at, and there's a lot going on. And I have some articles I want to read to you, and they're in the description. It's going to be a long one. Sit back and enjoy. But I wanted to start by playing a clip from Frank Herbert explaining what exactly, and this comes from a BBC interview, I think. I don't know if it's late 70s or early 80s, but what the story of Paul Atreides is all about.
Leaders amplify the mistakes. Their mistakes are amplified by the numbers who follow them without question. And charismatic leaders tend to build up followings, power structures. And those power structures tend to be taken over by people who are corruptible. I don't think that the old saw about power corrupting and absolute power corrupting absolutely is accurate. I think power attracts the corruptible.
Pretty simple, pretty easy to understand. But, there's a lot of people, and it drives me crazy, that we have this great thing called the internet. You're looking at me right now on the internet. And it's amazing. It's a repository of all the knowledge that human beings have garnered since we came out of the trees, basically, and probably since before then as well. And yet, when people, especially today, want to know something, especially op-eds or whatever, a lot of them pop off without a cursory Google search. And it would really help their point of view and to understand what's going on. Well, I want to begin by reading an article that came from a man named Paul B. Sturdivant off his website. And Paul B. Sturdivant says he's an author, a historian, and a public medievalist. And he wrote this article back in 2020. and I figured it was definitely something to take a gander at today. And this is what's going to start us on our journey. And again, the link is in the description. Maybe Dune, a story about a white Superman created by a eugenics program, is not the film we need right now. I have been lolling the Dune trailer around in my mouth. I was a huge fan of the novel when I read it in high school. I even wrote a term paper on it, much to the intense confusion of my sophomore English teacher. But the trailer that has everyone so excited has instead left me cold. Why? The film looks smart and seems to offer... Well, I hate when that happens. Microsoft Auto Update. Why do I have that on? Sorry. Why? The film looks smart and seems to offer a visually stunning, compelling take on the dense source material that has proven difficult for even some of the best filmmakers around to adapt. Denis Villeneuve is at the helm. If Arrival and Blade Runner 2049 are any indicator, he just might be the person to pull off Dune. My problem isn't so much with the film, obviously, since you can't judge from a trailer, it's with the source material. There are two core elements of the book's plot that are troubling. They are a white savior narrative and a promotion of eugenics. Considering the ongoing crisis of police brutality that spurred the uprising for Black lives and the recent damning accusations that the United States may be practicing eugenics by forcing sterilization on migrant women, maybe, just maybe, this is not the fucking time. Fascism and sci-fi, or if you will, Fash Gordon. The sci-fi and fantasy genres inherently promote and celebrate big ideas and imagine new worlds. But despite how forward-thinking it can be, some of the creators of classic science fiction and fantasy literature have been vile reactionaries. H.P. Lovecraft, father of the Cthulhu mythos that is a bedrock of the cosmic horror genre, was horrifyingly racist, sexist, and classicist. He seemed to hate everyone not like him, white, straight, male, well-to-do. That is one reason why the recent HBO series Lovecraft Country is so celebrated. Not just because it's a stellar bit of horror TV, but because it and the book it's based on takes a mythology steeped in racism and makes anti-racist stories from it. Robert E. Howard, creator of the Conan the Barbarian stories and a friend of Lovecraft's, was also deeply racist. Though his Wikipedia page repeatedly tries to excuse this as being a product of his time, as if telling racist stories is some kind of temporal inevitability, the fact remains. And as I wrote over on the Public Medievalist, the work of J.R.R. Tolkien and subsequent fantasy authors is laden with racism. And those three were hardly alone. Classic sci-fi and fantasy is littered with white male heroes battling aliens or monsters that have been coded as people of color. The community is in the midst of a reckoning. Last year, Jeanette Ng won the prestigious John W. Campbell Award for Best New Writer for her first book, Under the Pendulum Sun. The award was named after John W. Campbell. Campbell was editor of the astounding science fiction magazine, which he renamed Analog Science Fiction in 1960, from 1937 to 1971. He has been argued to be perhaps the most influential person in science fiction, at least during that era. Ng began her acceptance speech thusly. John W. Campbell, for whom this award was named, was a fucking racist. She was not wrong. Her speech ignited a firestorm in the community. But for many, this was old news. Campbell notoriously used his position of power to keep writers of color, Jewish people, and women from opportunities in sci-fi. Or when he did publish them, he required these authors to whiten their writing, replace characters of color with white people, and erasing Jewish-sounding names, in order to be published. Ng's speech may have kicked up controversy, but it seems only because she was one of the first brave enough to so publicly address the white supremacist elephant in sci-fi's room. She was quickly and thoroughly vindicated. The award was renamed the Astounding Award. Her 2019 acceptance speech itself won a Hugo Award in 2020. But Campbell's editorial perspective has had a long legacy in the genre. As Ng said in her award-winning speech, he, Campbell, is responsible for setting a tone of science fiction that still haunts the genre to this day. Sterile, male, white, exalting in the ambitions of imperialists and colonizers, settlers and industrialists. Frank Herbert's ambitious novel Dune was originally published in serialized format from 1963 to 1965. It originally appeared in analog science fiction under the editorship of, you guessed it, John W. Campbell. As with most editorial relationships, it is difficult to know how much influence Campbell had on Dune, but it is clear that the themes of the book passed muster with its white supremacist editor. For those of you who have not read the book, Dune is a sprawling epic set tens of thousands of years in the future. Much like in Star Wars and a lot of the science fantasy subgenre, the universe Herbert creates is a mashup of high technology, space travel, cloning, laser guns, and medieval culture, a crumbling empire, feudal relationships, monastic orders. The story follows Paul Atreides, the heir to the Atreides dynasty, as his family takes colonial ownership over a desert planet. This planet, Arrakis, is the only known source of a drug which is the key to interstellar travel. But the Atreides family is betrayed and attacked by the dastardly House Harkonnen, who, with the Emperor's blessing, hunt down and kill most of the Atreides. Paul and his mother escape only by fleeing into the desert, where they meet and join the indigenous Fremen people. I would just like to point out, the Fremen are not indigenous to Arrakis. They didn't evolve there. They came there at some point in the distant past. Dune takes place in 10,191, after all. So the Fremen, while I understand how they're filling in for indigenous people, they aren't indigenous to Arrakis. They meet and join the indigenous Fremen people, who are deeply coded as Arab and Bedouin because they were inspired by the Arab Bedouins. After taking the raw form of the space drug from participating in Fremen rituals, it is revealed that Paul is the prophesied Messiah, the Kwisatz Haderach, with the ability to see the future. He arms the Fremen with high-tech weapons and leads them to overthrow their Harkonnen and imperial colonial masters, ultimately setting himself up as the new emperor. Oh, and there are giant space worms. This summary leaves quite a bit out. The book is complex, with deep meditations on religion, society, and environmentalism, but hopefully, even from this summary, you can see some of the thematic contours. It can be easily read as a commentary on Middle Eastern oil and the then-rising power of the OPEC nations. It is an ecological book, allegorically addressing the destruction of important ecosystems in pursuit of transportation fuel. It is a parable about the rise of religious fundamentalism and the folly of clinging to power at all costs. It's also a book about colonialism, with obvious parallels to the anti-colonial struggles across the Middle East that were occurring in the years surrounding the writing of this book. But that is where one of its core problems lies, in its white savior. You are likely familiar with the trope of the white savior in fiction. A white person swoops into a community of color and manages to historically lift them up, in effect, to save them from themselves. It is deeply racist and paternalistic, and it can be found in countless films, TV shows, and even ad campaigns for foreign aid efforts. And more, it is intrinsically linked to the racist idea of the white man's burden, the odious notion that white men had a responsibility to civilize the world, which was itself used as a justification for colonialism. Paul is the white savior of Dune. The novel's closest cousin is probably its near contemporary, the 1962 film Lawrence of Arabia, and in both, the hero is a white representative of a foreign power at war in a desert land. In both, they integrate themselves with the local Arab or Arab-coded powers, and in both, they lead a daring guerrilla war against imperial power and win. But that is where the stories diverge. In Lawrence of Arabia, Lawrence ultimately fails in his quest to help the locals achieve self-governance because, as the film tells it, those locals are too invested in old grudges and jockeying for power to keep the lights on. This is a deeply racist idea that has been recapitulated in media coverage of the governments of post-American invasion Iraq and Afghanistan. What about the rest of the Middle East? In Dune, the ending is arguably even worse. Paul, with his Fremen armies at his back, overthrow the Emperor and set themselves up as the new center of power, with the white Messiah, Superman, at its apex. But Paul also fails, but in a different direction. For a moment, in the climactic fight at the end of the book, Paul takes stock of the future and does not like what he sees. As he peers into the future, he sees an inevitable galactic total war, and that starting that war was his real destiny. Even the faint gaps were closed now. Here was the unborn jihad, he knew. Here was the race consciousness that he had known once his own terrible purpose. The race of humans had felt its own dormancy, sensed itself grown stale, and knew now only the need to experience turmoil in which the genes would mingle and the strong new mixtures survive. All humans were alive as an unconscious single organism in this moment, experiencing a kind of sexual heat that could override any barrier. And Paul saw how futile were any efforts of his to change any smallest bit of this. He had thought to oppose the jihad within himself, but the jihad would be. His legions would rage out from Arrakis even without him. They needed only the legend he had already become. A sense of failure pervaded him. Paul's vision is correct. In the Dune sequels, he and his family rule tyrannically. In a war that he began costs the universe 61 billion lives. This complicates the white savior. Critics of this reading of Dune, like Harris Duran in an essay for Medium, have argued that this and an overview given by the author makes Dune a critique of the white savior rather than a recapitulation of it. But where this misses the mark is the very inevitability of it all. The idea that the crypto-Arab Fremen are destined only either to be colonized or to undertake a mega jihad, and that being uplifted by a white Superman is the fulcrum on which that rests, removes their agency completely. That the idea of a messianic figure was embedded in their culture by their colonial masters does not particularly change that. A lack of agency on the part of the people of color is the core of the white savior. Whatever it is, they couldn't have done it without their white savior. In the story, Paul cannot see any way out of this coming jihad, but this is making the way that white saviors see themselves into a deterministic inevitability. The author can have his cake and eat it too. The hero of his story can cause the deaths of millions and remain sympathetic. Despite all his agency through the book to that point, oh well, genocidal war was inevitable. He is not the white savior critiqued. He is the white savior transcended to a shrugging, Calvinistic godhood. And ultimately, the Arabs are designed to kill everyone in a religious war is not a good look, no matter what complicating factors are in play. Dune and Eugenics. This is a very interesting poster, actually. Even more worrying than its white savior and anti-colonial themes are the way that the novel embraces eugenics. Eugenics is, in short, a debunked scientific theory that humans can and should be improved via selective breeding. This would be accomplished by encouraging the strong, however defined, to have many children and preventing undesirables from having them. Eugenics was most famously promoted by the Nazis in their pursuit of a fictional pure Aryan master race and led to the mass murder of millions of Jewish people, people with disabilities, Romani, homosexuals, and others. But it is important to remember that eugenics was enthusiastically embraced by white supremacists the world over, especially in the UK and the USA. And this should be of little surprise since eugenics is, at its heart, a deeply racist and ableist endeavor. What makes a person superior or inferior is always in the eyes of the eugenicist, who, in their pursuit of what they believe to be superiority, seeks to stamp out difference. Eugenics led to forced sterilization and forced abortions for thousands of women, particularly women of color and women with disabilities around the world. And with the simultaneous rise of cheap home genetic testing kits and a lurch toward the extreme right around the world, a new eugenics movement has taken hold. Under the coded language of human biodiversity, the current extreme right advocates for pseudoscientific genetic explanations and solutions for their racist ideas. But even on the more mainstream right, the white supremacist conspiracy theory of the Great Replacement, that people of color are having more children and having mixed-race children, thus leading to the end of the white race, has been gaining cachet for decades. When, in 2006, pundit John Gibson told his white Fox News audience to make more babies because the USA was becoming more Hispanic, that is the theory of eugenics at work. When Donald Trump praised the good bloodlines of people like Henry Ford and his own allegedly good genes, that is the language of eugenics. When women are sterilized in ICE custody, that is eugenics in horrific action. But this new eugenics is just the old eugenics in a clean suit. It still uses discredited and debunked science to argue that superiority is in the blood. This line of thinking has been present in quite a lot of genre fiction as well. Anytime a hero's special abilities are explained as being in their blood, or that certain bloodlines are particularly important, that is eugenics light. The Star Wars franchise is maybe the most popular example. The Skywalkers and Palpatines are powerful Jedi because of intrinsic ability carried from parent to child. The Last Jedi was thrilling because it seemed in the revelation that Rey's parents were nobodies to break from this tradition. But J.J. Abrams, seeming to bow to pressure from some of the worst in the fan community, reversed course in the sequel and remade Rey back into yet another blood Jedi, yet another genetic Ubermensch. But if Star Wars is eugenics light, Dune is eugenics straight up, no chaser. In the novel, it's revealed that Paul has his supernatural abilities because he is the product of a human breeding program conducted in secret by a shadowy Illuminati-esque cabal of women called the Bene Gesserit. The Bene Gesserit had been selectively breeding their members with the leaders of the imperial houses in order to create the Kwisatz Haderach, a super being who would rule the universe under their control. But alas, where Paul's mother was supposed to have a girl who would then give birth to the Kwisatz Haderach, she instead followed her husband's wishes for a boy. And so Paul, the Kwisatz Haderach, is born a generation early and beyond Bene Gesserit control. Yes, it's a lot. Science fiction, though it may be, the science this narrative it is based on is not just bunk, but deeply destructive. It doesn't matter whether the Bene Gesserit are shown to be evil. The very idea that they could be successful is itself an evil one. No amount of selective breeding would bring about the Superman that either the Gesserit or the Nazis are after. And more, the strength of humanity is in its collective diversity, not its purity. The very idea that a selective breeding program like this could even theoretically work, might even have the chance to bring about a superhero, might as well be an ad for the alt-right. Despite having enjoyed the original novel when I was a teenager and respecting the prior work of everyone involved in the film, I don't think I will be seeing Dune. I'm not calling for a boycott, as if that would make any difference at all, but for those who want to see it, despite understanding why it is deeply problematic, I would ask why they are engaging in a willful suspension of disapproval over a film with such clear, odious themes. I look forward to genre fiction in big-budget films that embraces better versions of our possible pasts and future. I look forward to adaptations of work like Eng's that have shaken off the legacy of fascist editors and racist writers. I want to see Denis Villeneuve adapt the next great work of speculative fiction for the screen, not rehash the last one. As you might imagine, I hated that article, but it brings up some really interesting points. Now, first of all, the idea of eugenics, the way it's presented here, obviously a horrible thing, but eugenics is dealt with in science fiction many different ways. For instance, genetic engineering is something that has gone back into science fiction for a very long time. And if you look at a movie like Gattaca, Andrew Nichols' Gattaca, for example, we've all seen it. Everyone loves it. Gattaca is dealing with what happens, and this is going to happen. What happens when human genetics are at the point where we can now improve humanity? Now, I've always believed, if you look at how nature works, the strongest, the fittest survive. That's how nature works. You know, when species are bred or when they breed, the strongest in nature do survive. Mutations occur, but the weak die, the strong survive and propagate and continue on. So the idea behind genetics is not necessarily a wrong idea, but when applied by one group of people to eliminate another group of people because they hate them, well, that's not eugenics as much as it is fucking evil. And I've always believed, my personal belief in terms of humanity, is that eventually, and as I was talking about this on a stream yesterday, that one day, if we, assuming we survive our future and we survive the coming difficulties humanity will face, when we become spacefaring, we are not going to be black or white or yellow or whatever color, red. We'll be humans from Earth. And people won't even realize that we have different ethnicities. I'm not going to be here, but I really look forward to that day, because once we can, as every astronaut can tell you, once you stand on the moon or you orbit the Earth in the International Space Station, any petty differences we have seem to melt away when you can change your perspective. And I think one of the things that I've always enjoyed about science fiction, fantasy, and horror literature or movies is what they're very good at doing is changing people's perspectives. And I've always enjoyed stories about people, Khan, Nooney, and Singh. You know, Khan was a product of controlled genetics, as Kirk says in the episode Space Seed, which was from Star Trek's first season, the 66-67 season. If you watch that episode, you know, it's not necessarily considered one of the top 10 best Star Trek episodes, although Montalban's performance is amazing in it, but it brings up really interesting points. That if you're a genetically engineered Superman and you have better intellect and you're stronger than your average bear, well, as Spock points out, superior ability breeds superior ambition. And the scientists who engaged in eugenics, the eugenics wars after they were called that in Star Trek, they forgot that. They forgot that when you create exceptional people that are out going and doing exceptional things, they become ambitious. And people that aren't as exceptional hate them. And you realize you don't have to be genetically engineered for that to happen. You know, I think this article, and I read this article because it was like when I was a teenager, I read Dune. Then I went to college and got inundated with all kinds of political thought by my professors. Now, I won't get into what kind of thought that is. It was very apparent from this article. But everything's bad. The past is bad. Even, look, here's the thing. Human history is full of hateful people that did good work. You know, and the fact that John W. Campbell, you know, he might have been a racist, but he had work that endured. Now, should we hate him for that? Or can we instead look into the past and learn that most people are complicated? You know, John W. Campbell might have liked a certain kind of writing, but that was because the only people that were doing that kind of writing had a tendency to be very, well, vanilla. And it has expanded out. You know, you ended up having people like Samuel R. Delany and Octavia Butler come in. You've now had a lot of female science fiction writers. I've mentioned that James Tiptree Jr. was not really James Tiptree Jr. That was a pseudonym for a female author that wanted to write science fiction but didn't think she'd get published. You know, then we had people like Anne McCaffrey, her Dragon Riders of Pern series. You know, and things change and they morph and they propagate. And bad ideas eventually are weeded out and better ideas will take root and grow. Because, let's face it, bad ideas like bad genetics can't survive the natural order of things. And I think that science fiction is always a good place to look. And the evolution has happened rapidly in science fiction. And as our civilization, dare I say, American society has progressed, I mean, we had, at the same time that we're talking about H.P. Lovecraft being a racist or John W. Campbell being a racist, these are people that were working in the field. We had the civil rights movement of the 1960s. There were Jim Crow laws on the books in the South. I mean, and these people were products of a time when that existed. There was a huge American Nazi party that was very supportive of of Hitler's government right here in the United States. There's a new documentary about that. And like all of that existed. And so what I don't understand is it's easy to pillory the past. And it's weird to say, okay, in a world, for instance, people are talking about, a lot of talk about slavery and reparations. There was slavery all around the world in every civilization for thousands of years. But there were cultures like, well, Britain and the United States that put an end to slavery. And yet, all people do is are reminded of our past when we had chattel slavery, the transatlantic slave trade, and everybody wants to, still talk about it. Have we moved on? Not entirely. There's still lots of slavery around the world, even today. Racism runs rampant. But a lot of times it's being used as an excuse. There's a lot of excuses being made because one of the things about human beings, we're inherently lazy. We'd much rather blame someone else for our problems. Another reason why I like working in Hollywood, because when you're making a movie, you don't have time to blame anybody. You just have to solve the problem. Blaming people solves nothing. Now, if somebody's a real incompetent boob and can't do their job, you give them the old heave-ho, or them, or her, whatever. You get rid of them. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with living in a meritocracy either. You want the cream to rise to the top because those are the people that get shit done. And whether they're nice or not, well, that's another question. Whether they're good people or not, again, another question. Presentism would tell you that we can only hire these kinds of people to do these kinds of things to make a world. Here's what I've always found funny about everybody that complains and bitches and moans and let's tear it all down. Fuck capitalism. Okay, but what are you going to replace it with? When you have to feed 300 million people and you have to distribute crops or meat products or anything to that many people just in America, who's going to do it? Look at the infrastructure that's been built up over decades, centuries even, to keep our civilization going. Who's going to do that? You want to tear it all down to do what? What are you going to do? We're going to live in the dark ages now? You're going to get rid of all the power? You're going to get rid of hot and cold running water? No one thinks about that. You hear all about these people that bitch and moan and complain about how the world is such a terrible place. But then they don't have any. You ask them, okay, well, let's game this out. Let's turn off all the electricity. Just start with that. All the electricity, which means in a week, our phones are dead. There's no hot and cold running water. What do? If you want to get rid of all the infrastructure that's been built by all the, the evil, whatever group of people you want to say were evil that built the entire infrastructure of the world, if you want to say that they're all evil, be my guest. But what are you going to replace that with? Most of the people that are bitching and moaning and complaining wouldn't last a week, much less a month or a year or a decade or a century. So what's great about science fiction, even if it's written by hateful people, if the books have interesting ideas that we can learn from, they might be hateful and you might hate them, but they still have something to offer. And to sit there and say that, oh, it's just a white savior trope, well, that's from your perspective. Are you reading science fiction from Asia? I'll tell you something. I've seen more unique and interesting racism from Asian cultures than I have from America. Go back not too far, but in the 20th century, and see what the Japanese thought of the Chinese, especially during World War II. Read about the rape of Nanking. Wow. Let me just tell you, there are people on this planet, no matter where they are, that hate another group of people, and they're not all white. And it's such a weird thing because we only talk about stuff here from our perspective. And one of the things that's really important is we live on a planet where we have to start thinking globally, not necessarily about a one world government, but about people and their regional histories, and understand what makes us the same and what makes us different, and how can we learn from one another to move forward. So when I'm not going to watch Dune. I read it when I was a teenager, but I went to college and now I know better. Well, Dune's not going to go away. I mean, these ideas still exist. People are going to find them. People are going to be inspired by them. And now it's like you read Dune when you were a teenager. Now you went to college and now you feel guilty for liking Dune. Look, if something spurs your imagination and then you later find out that the person who wrote it is a fucking douchebag, if the work itself inspired you, does that not make the work have some kind of intrinsic value? The person who made it might be a jerk, but that doesn't mean that the work that was created necessarily suddenly doesn't have value. Just like the people today, the idea of cancel culture and the craziness that happens, like, okay, somebody does something bad, let's get rid of them. What are you going to do with them, ultimately? And today, for the first time in my life, it seems like that there are groups of people that get mad at other groups of people and say things that lead me to believe that your ultimate, whatever your what you want to do, let's just call it what it is. you'd rather get rid of those people than have to deal with them. And we've seen this over and over and over again. The 20th century is full of ideologues who wind up deciding, well, I hate these people, so let's just kill them. Problem solved. We saw that first century, and that was just in the 20th century. You can go back thousands of years and see the same shit. Now, one of my favorite things in terms of science fiction, it's explaining basically, my favorite example of colonization it was in 2001, A Space Odyssey. If any of you have seen it or haven't seen it, if you haven't seen it, it still remains one of the greatest science fiction movies, if not the greatest science fiction movie ever made, directed by one of my heroes, Stanley Kubrick. Now, here's the thing. So Stan the Man opens his movie. It's a sequence called The Dawn of Man. Now, he used both men in ape suits and real chimpanzees to show proto-humans, and they're basically living a nice bucolic life, just trying to eke out a meager existence, you know? And at the beginning, this tribe of, let's call them the good apes, are just living lives. Sometimes they get attacked by lions. Sometimes they just hang out with everybody, and it's all hunky-dory. No one's having a problem with anybody. But their watering hole that they need for sustenance, one day, another group of apes shows up. And because they haven't learned or evolved yet, this group of apes is very loquacious and starts screaming and yelling at our group of apes, let's call them. Moonwatcher and his crew, if you've read the book, they're just chilling out, and then they're getting yelled at by other apes, like, yo, what's up? But they're like, I don't know what to do. So they walk away. They leave. You know, and maybe the movie, if you want to read it this way, there were other people that were observing, or other entities observing what was happening on Earth. And they saw a moment like maybe this was the first moment ever in proto-human history where one group of humans or proto-humans came up to another group of humans and decided, fuck these people. We want what they have. So we're going to take it. And because no one knew any better, they just were louder about it, screamed and yelled and bitched and complained. And our group, Moonwatcher's group, kind of just slunk away, let them have the water. And that's when the alien entities decided to act. And they put down the monolith. This monolith, this black, call it an obelisk, but it was the monolith. 1 by 4 by 9. A slab of black, otherworldly. Was it metal? Was it rubber? Was it plastic? Who knows? I never got to touch it. But because I didn't live there at that time. But so it's there. What it represented was the kind of unnatural perfection that had no place in this natural world. And our group of proto-humans, because it presumably made a sound in the movie, it's insinuated that it's making some kind of a sound, whether it was in their heads or not, or whether we're hearing it. I mean, it was actually music. But whatever it was, brought the apes to trepidatiously come over and touch this thing. Touch this monolith. Maybe commune, call it what you want. But what happens was, and if you've seen 2001, say it with me now, or just you won't know, it's not one word, but the proto-humans, our group, Moonwatcher's group, the good proto-humans, they're hanging out and they're eating, probably thirsty as hell because they don't have their water supply. And one of them, I don't know if it's Moonwatcher, but Moonwatcher's looking down at the long, bleached out, sun-bleached bones of a dead animal. They probably waited till that animal died and they ate it or whatever. And one of our characters, Moonwatcher, he's playing with these bones, and the monolith, the encounter with the monolith, has instilled in this proto-human an idea that they'd never had before, an idea to use tools. Like, I could pick up this bone. And his idea is to bring it down, and he starts using one bone to smash the other bones and smash the skull of a long dead animal. Aha. We can go take what those assholes took from us, but we have a way to do it that they don't have. And then they go. And we see the first murder. The first human kills, proto-human kills another. Beats him over the head, or her over the head, or they over the head. with a bone. Ba-bam. And then in a victory dance, Moonwatcher, I think it's Moonwatcher. I don't remember. I'm sorry. It just gets me. I'm just going to call him Moonwatcher. Moonwatcher tosses the bone into the sky, and in one of the most famous match cuts in cinema history, the bone goes up in the air and turns into an orbiting nuclear device orbiting the Earth in 2001. Or maybe 2000 because there's time that passes. Either way, it's a nuclear weapon that's orbiting the Earth. So we see the evolution of the monolith's interference with alien intelligence interferes, or maybe sparks the evolution of ideas in humanity, and it's led to an orbiting nuclear device millions of years later. Great. Love it. And we're off to the races. But you basically see all of human history in that one scene. Well, we're stronger. We've got technology. We have knowledge. And we want that water. Or that water back. Call it colonization. Call it whatever you want. Same old story. Natural resources. You want to expand. And the thing is, everybody talks about now colonization is bad. It's like one stronger group comes to another weaker group, takes their shit over, tries to make them think the way they think. But this is nature. This is like, yep, we're more technologically advanced than you guys. I mean, I'm sorry. If you had your own culture and your own weapons, you'd be able to fight us for this water. But you don't. We do. And we're going to take your shit. And is it good or bad? It just is. It's probably a rule of nature, and now we want to look at it, those poor people. I would say, as a meritocratist, I'd be like, well, if those poor people had better technology and were smarter about things, then they would be able to fend off your ridiculous attempts at taking their land and trying to impose your culture on them. But then again, I'd probably be called a eugenicist. So, look, I wish that human culture and human civilization wasn't full of this. I really do. I wish that these beautiful indigenous cultures that have existed for thousands, tens of thousands of years were not destroyed when a superior, older civilization that had more technology and they knew what's up. These poor people never usually know what hit them. Unless they're the Tutsi and the Hutu, in which case they know exactly what hit them. But what was that all about? Again, tribal warfare doesn't have to be a racial one. It's a culture one, I guess. But human history, the point is that this is not a race issue. This is a human being issue. That there are groups of people, and it's happened throughout the world, everywhere you go. It's not like every native culture, every indigenous culture was hunky-dory, lived in peace. The American frontier, before the Americans arrived, and it was an American frontier, the people that actually lived in the Americas were not all, they were not the Eloi. Some of them had some Morlock behavior. And that's true in all of human history. All of human history. And, rather than condemn people for history, we should instead be able to have conversations and examine it and take away from it. Well, what can we take away from it today? Rather than, from our present day perch, we're going to label these people in history problematic. Why? Why are you going to label them problematic? They just were. Did they have bad ideas? Sure. There was good ideas too. We are here after all. We were able to stop the Cuban Missile Crisis from exploding into nuclear Armageddon, weren't we? The cooler heads prevailed. Every single person, good and bad, that has existed since the dawn of time is the reason we're here today. Good ideas, good people tend to propagate. Thank God that we so far, I used to think, I've never been so pessimistic, and I'm an optimistic person, about the future of the human race as I am right now, only because I think we have been engineered into all being assholes. I see more assholes now than I ever used to see. I thought the Old West, eventually we're getting to the point where people are going to start strapping on their 6-shooters, and they're going to be like, Yul Brynner in Westworld getting pissed off. Slap you with your drink. Get this man a bib. Whatever. And then it turns into a gunfight. And then people are just shooting each other dead. I mean, we're already kind of there. Happens all the time in the United States. People are just shooting each other in the streets. Bang, bang. Because some people believe that a diss is enough for somebody to die over. Anyway, let's get to the next article I wanted to read. And I'm curious what you guys have to say. Let me just jump on in. And I would like to see what you guys are saying now. Binary Sunset Media says, those who claim Dune is a white savior tale reveal ignorance, lacking a full grasp of the book's message. Sadly, they're trapped in a mindset highlighted in the novel itself, enslaved by ideology. You are correct. B. Depp says, I saw The Zone of Interest. My review, a haunting masterpiece. The themes run along the lines of what you're talking about tonight, 100%. I appreciate that. Binary Sunset Media for $20 comes back and says, the Fremen lack agency? They aren't obligated to engage in the jihad. Even if Paul died, he'd still be a martyr, solidifying his symbol. Should he have handed the empire to the Harkonnens? Frankly, should he have handed the empire to the Harkonnens? Frankly, the article seems racist. Oh, it is. I just wanted to read it because I wanted to start there. Bad Canadian Kid says, I agree with your co-host today. Anyone who isn't fully on board with canon character Morph is branded a villain. What do we do with villains? We shun them, exclude them, and join with Magneto to defeat them. Oh, wait. Is it possible I'm the real villain? Bad Canadian Kid, it's very interesting. See, so what Bad Canadian Kid is referring to is we were talking about the idea of Morph on X-Men 97, the new iteration of the animated cartoon, and people were explaining, it was really interesting to me. I'm listening to the creators of Morph, because Morph was created for the show, about how Morph could turn into anybody. He turned into men and women, that even turned into what Jean Grey and was trying to seduce trying to seduce Wolverine. So we're having this conversation, and I'm thinking to myself, yes, because that's what allegorical science fiction does. And the whole point is you don't ever hit anything on the head. That's didactic and kind of, overbearing. What you do is you use metaphor. And that's why with science fiction, you can create the Trill, for instance, a joined species where you have a symbiote inside a humanoid body, and the symbiote can be both men and women, usually 3 or 4 times, can be married to both men and women. The Trill stands in for all that. And that's what science fiction, fantasy, and horror do. They take, rather than deal with things directly, look what happens when you take an X-Man character, and call him non-binary, non-binary. That's like you're taking a metaphor and putting on didactic ideology on top of the metaphor. The great thing, the beautiful thing about the X-Men was they could be anybody who felt like they were an outcast from society, or they were marginalized, or no one heard their voice. They stood in. The X-Men were all of those people, everybody. And then when you go on and you take an X-Man, and all X-Men have the X gene in them. They're all homo superior, and then you turn around and you brand one of them. I mean, and John did bring up the idea, well, there's black X-Men, there's gay X-Men. Yeah, that's fine, because that's a quality of humanity. And that's the thing. But to me, the term non-binary didn't even exist 10, 20 years ago when the X-Men were created. So, I mean, I guess you could say that it's okay to make Morph non-binary, but he was already a character that could be both men and women, or be neither. So why brand him with something? Then it just dates the character. And then people that might have identified with Morph for other reasons that aren't non-binary now are like, oh, he's a non-binary character. I don't get to identify with Morph as closely as I used to. Why do that? Why not just leave Morph the way he is and tell the stories, code them as you want. Anyway, A world in pajamas. We love living in a world in pajamas. Gattaca is a favorite movie. You can go on Google Scholar for free and have access to thousands of journals. Visit a Kindle and obtain free books in libraries. We have knowledge at our fingertips, unlike our ancestors, to learn about the world. 100% world in pajamas. I love hearing from you. Cheers to you. You're absolutely correct. Skiz Spivak Esquire gifted 5 Burnettwork memberships. PGS Hero Man of Action became a member. Flav became a member at the PGS Hero level. Adia from Galactic Patrol, I believe, gifted 4 PGS Hero memberships. Amazing. Ted Fitzpatrick became a PGS Hero member of the channel. Thank you all. That's very cool. Now, for those members who might not know this, you new members, we have member chats every other Saturday. Tomorrow, we had a member chat last Saturday, so there is no member chat tomorrow. There will be next Saturday. So let's get to our second article. And this was printed after the last article. Or no, maybe before, I don't know. I'm not sure. This is also from 2020. It's from September 11th, 2020. And Harris Durrani, and I got this from Medium. And again, it is a 4-year-old, 3.5-year-old article. Harris Durrani wrote this. Do you think Dune is a white savior narrative? Well, you're wrong. To accept that interpretation is to reinscribe an account of the novel promulgated by adolescent white boys since the first of Frank Herbert's Dune books came out in the 1960s. Spoilers ahead. For an explanation of how I define a white savior narrative, see Coda 3, Defining the Savior Narrative and the Problem of Fremen Agency. By the way, again, all 3 of these articles down in the description. If you want to click on them, find their links, and you can follow along. The authorial intent to critique... You know what? Before I get into this, I want to play another clip of Frank Herbert talking about leading a good life.
We all have to make choices in what we perceive as good and evil. I had to speak at a Jesuit university at their commencement exercises not long ago. I'll give you the speech. I got up and I said, you're all graduating today, and you expect me to tell you what you will face out there in that big real world. The only thing I'm going to tell you is that if only one of you chooses to live by the golden rule, this will be a better world. And I sat down. The applause lasted longer than the speech. I think they were applauding the shortness of the speech. But you see, if you do look at your fellow human beings as individuals with feelings and hang-ups the way you have some, and say, well, if I can help you, I will. I'll try not to exacerbate your problems. I won't always succeed, but that's my main goal. Then this is a better world. But you have to make the choice individually, and you have to make it all the time. You can't make it once for the rest of your life. You can be like some people are and say, well, if I don't, George will. I mean, that just makes 2 of you, you see, and you can each lean on each other and say, I'm doing it because George does it, and George can say, I'm doing it because you're doing it. So don't fall into that trap. And yeah, people will take advantage of you if you try to live this way. It's just an ongoing commitment that you have to make, and you have to do it individually, and society cannot do it for you.
That was from the man himself. That was Frank Herbert at a UCLA lecture in 1985. So let's get back into Harris Durrani's article. And we'll get down to here. The authorial intent to critique the Savior. In a 1969 interview, Frank Herbert directly situated Dune as a critique of T.E. Lawrence and other instances of Western exploitation of the Avatar power. We've, Western man, set out our missionaries to do our dirty work for us and then come along behind them with a certain belief that we are right in anything that we do, because God has told us so. God and the person of the Avatar. Here, Herbert was not responding to later critiques of the novels. He was talking about the book only a few years after its release, when public opinion had yet to take full form. He was in fact responding to the famed science fiction editor John Campbell, a proponent of the hero's journey in Golden Age sci-fi, although we know now that he's a horrible racist. The context of this portion of the interview is Herbert's suggestion that Campbell rejected the sequel to Dune, Dune Messiah, because Campbell held to a Western notion of the myth of individual triumph, as opposed to stories of broader social, collective movements. Herbert's comments, and as I'll show below, they're bearing out in the text of Dune as well as its sequels, suggest many readers of Dune, and perhaps not its sequels, although these elements are in the first book too, misread it. Perhaps not realizing how intertextual and meta Herbert considered it. Intentionally, he said, it's high camp, a send-up of the hero's journey. I recall enjoying the sequel more than Dune itself, in part because it was tighter and more thrilling, but also because it was darker, recasting Dune in a new light, although not one divorced from what was suggested in the first book. Here are some choice quotes from the interview. The difference between a hero and an anti-hero is where you stop the story. If you're true to life, the story goes on because human beings go on. Now, you can confine your story to one individual, and therefore, as far as John W. Campbell is concerned, the story begins with birth and ends with death. But if you're dealing with larger movements, the interviewer said the parameters are much broader, then there is no real ending. It's just a place where you stop the story. And one of the reasons in the book Dune I stop it the way I do, I'm deliberately building up and carrying momentum as though you were going down a slide. And then you skid out of a story with all of this clinging to you. One of the threads in the story is to trace a possible way a Messiah is created in our society. The man must recognize the myth he's living in because the creation of an avatar is a myth-making process we've created in our society. The man must recognize the myth he's living in because the creation of an avatar is a myth-making process. We've done it in recent times. Look at what's happening to John F. Kennedy, who is a very earthy, real, and not totally holy man. Laughs from the interviewer. Here we have a likable person, but in real life a flesh and blood sense, who, by the process of immolation, becomes something larger than life. He could well have become an avatar for the Arabs if Lawrence of Arabia had died at the crucial moment of the British. Yeah, if, for example, he'd gone up and killed the people who were destroying his dream, walked into that conference and said, "Gentlemen, I have under my javella, I don't know what that word, a surprise, bang, bang," and he had been killed, he would have been defiled, and it would have been the most terrifying thing the British had ever encountered, because the Arabs would have swept the entire peninsula with that sort of force. One of the things we've done in our society is exploited this power. Western man has exploited this avatar power. That was part of it. Of course, it was ignited by the ideas I encountered in reading about desert societies. And I think that the idea of the way Western society has exploited this force, we've used it quite consciously. We've set out our missionaries to do our dirty work for us, and then come right along behind them with a certain belief that we're right in anything that we do, because God has told us so, God and the person of the avatar. Let's see. Okay, here we go. In talking about Western man, we tend to think that we can overcome nature by mathematical means. We accumulate enough data and we just subdue it. We subdue nature. This is a one-pointed vision of man, because if you really start looking at man, at Western man, you see that you can cut him right down the middle and he's lying on his backside. You see, this is hard because he has the interviewer in here. The point that you made earlier, talking about the death of the planetary ecologist, Dr. Kynes, in Dune being a very touching spot, wife Beverly, it was also a very significant point. A lot of the story swung around this. How the ecologist dies, I thought, was very important. This was, of course, deliberately done for that purpose. It's a turning point of the whole book, a pivot, if you might say. The very fact that Kynes, who is the Western man in my original construction of the book, because Dr. Kynes was not a female as she is in Villeneuve's version, does not detract from the fact that he is still part of this system, because it is observing him. He has lived out of rhythm with it, and he got in the trough of the wave and it stumbled on him. Well, ecology, as somebody said, I would like to attribute this, but I don't recall where I encountered it. I did read over 200 books as background on this novel. The ecology is the science of understanding consequences. A lovely expression, and of course, each of us of us individually is a product of everything that's happened to us, and this happened to me. It hit me, so I used it, because as far as I was concerned, one of the purposes of this story was to delineate consequences of inflicting yourself upon a planet, upon your environment. Western man has assumed that all you need for any problem is enough force, power, and that there's no problem which won't submit to this approach. Even the problem of our own ignorance, which you see throws it out the window right there, because it is an asinine assumption, and it is the basic fallacy of Western man's approach to living. Now, I'm not saying that we immediately drop this and adopt Vendetta. We need what I would call a science of wisdom. The moral norm, as I saw it in Dune, is something that is imposed upon people by their environment. Ethical law takes a step in another direction, and it says that I, thinking animal, see that the logical consequences of these moral actions are such and so, and maybe I better modify the moral law slightly by a higher ethical law, which is pretty interesting. You've hit on the way in which the character of Paul was constructed. It was a conflict between absolutes and the necessity of the moment. That's absolutely right. This is an exercise in showing up, you might say, the fallacy of absolutism. Now, this is back to the writer of this article. Herbert's statements bear out in a reading of the text. Mahdi is not an indigenous Fremen term, but one that the Bene Gesserit installed in order to manipulate the Fremen and Arrakis. Their objective is literally called the Missionaria Protectiva. Moreover, the jihad in the novels is not purely indigenous to the Fremen, but a reference to the Harkonnen imperialist bloodline. It's arguably white, or at least very Western, imperialism. And an aside on jihad. Many have noted the recent trailer for the 2020 Dune film swapped crusade for jihad. I recall crusade, or language alluding to Christian missionary violence, being in the books, in addition to the more prominent use of jihad. I think the reason for the switch in the trailer is that jihad would be confusing to a modern audience. But I'm really hoping they stick with jihad in the film, because that confusion, in my view, can be productive and interesting. The use of this word in the novels has aged well, as I see it, and becomes more subversive when read today, as I understand it. What many readers, including myself when I first read it as a teen, lose sight of is that the jihad which Paul fears in Dune is the jihad of imperialism, and not exactly the subaltern, although tired to co-option of subaltern, a war spurred by the race memory consciousness of the Harkonnen bloodline in Paul and Alia, and to the Bene Gesserit's Missionaria Protectiva, basically a Christian missionary project to plant the Mahdi myth among the Fremen in order to indirectly control Arrakis. So jihad in Dune is a particular form of Christian missionary imperialism, exploitation, and appropriation, as I understand it, which reads to me at least as wildly subversive for today's popular discourse. I should also add that I say this with great personal investment as an author whose book, Technologies of the Self, is narrated by a protagonist named Jihad with the specific authorial purpose of disturbing white, liberal, brown-skinned, white mask audiences. In conclusion, if they don't use jihad and other Islamic and MENA references in the film, I will go Jackarudu on their asses. In Dune Messiah, Paul sees himself as an imperial tyrant, and so do many of the Fremen. He even describes himself as an exponentially worse version of Genghis Khan or Hitler. It's true that because the series is centrally about imperialist manipulation and indigenous resistance, Fremen agency thus appears downplayed, especially due to the narrative focus on the Atreides and the BG. I mostly agree here, but even then I read that the focus on leaders is critical. These are big words. Hagiographical. It's notable that, as mentioned above, Herbert saw the series as about communities, not individuals. He believes that it's not that power corrupts absolutely, but rather it attracts the corruptible. Jesus, Muhammad, American presidents, no matter how pure, were also bound by larger power structures, their legacies and goals disconnected from or co-opted by fragmented communities. In this way, he plays pretty explicitly on Shiaism among many other elements of Christian and Jewish histories. Herbert's focus on structure versus agency in history, he considered becoming a historian, and on the manipulation of the Fremen make them see agency less. But what makes the text of the story so interesting is how hard it is for imperialists to maintain power. There are always resistances or unexpected consequences from the environment or the Fremen or other imperialists. It's well known that, as quoted elsewhere in this essay, Dune is about ecology as the science of understanding consequences, and about the consequences of violence. I think there's room to say Herbert is perhaps too sympathetic to Paul and his other so-called saviors, in that they understand and are succumbing to a power structure, the jihad, and, for Paul at least, want to avoid it but can't. Herbert's idea of power as attracting the corruptible can be read as an apologia for good-hearted leaders overtaken by the mob, although it's way more complicated and Paul can be read as motivated more by vengeance than saving. And then this goes on. Fremen and resource scarcity, the noble savages, the tragedy of the commons. Well, anyway, this goes on and on and on. It's a huge article, and I would suggest everybody read it. But as you can see, it's massively gigantic. But I do want to read this part. The dialectics of moral and ethical law. There's a possibility of a deeper Orientalism where Herbert distinguishes between moral versus ethical law, or law versus religion. These are stilted terms and laden with Orientalist connotations. But there's more to mine here. Basically, what Herbert means to do is considered law that's a direct response to the necessity of social environmental conditions of survival, or to religious or mystical elements not reducible to rational terms, versus law that requires some more abstract level of rational thinking. I think of this in terms of the distraction some Islamic scholars make between taqlid, unthinking imitation, and a word I can't even begin to pronounce, pure independent reasoning. I can't even try to pronounce that. Although I know that in Islamic thought, my rough translations are arguably Orientalist, or it's not. It's like Orient, not Oriental, oriented. The best example of the morality and ethics relationship in the text of Dune is Paul's decision at the end of the novel to reject the Fremen moral law of killing a tribe leader to succeed him. He refuses to kill Stilgar in order to succeed him, and instead advocates for reform of the Fremen system, ethics over morals. What's interesting is that in Dune Messiah, Paul becomes disillusioned with one might call his modernization project to reform the Fremen in this way, through ethical law and reason, while Stilgar, the Fremen, becomes more obsessed with ethical law, enacting bureaucratic orders that have lost their moral value, caught up in abstractions and disconnected rational thinking. And Dune Messiah ends where Paul accepts a moral law. Instead of choosing to live as a blind man among his people, he chooses to walk off into the desert, following the Fremen custom that blind men must dispose of themselves in this way. I'm not going to justify the ableism here, but the interesting point is the dialectical complex back and forth between moral and ethical law. It's not a simple Orientalist binary as I read the text, although there are tinges of it. In light of these themes, one might restate Dune's central question as an exploration whose closure, continually open state, or non-existence oversimplification has been the subject of much Orientalist declensionism and post-colonial critique in the studies of Islamic thought as really a multidimensional, dialectical, atemporal portal. It's very complicated, interwoven, shifting, as it was in history. A lot of words there, hard to read. But I would suggest, if you want to read the rest of it, it's a very interesting, it's a very long article. Jump down into the description, leave some thoughts, but also find the link to the article. And again, I think it's good stuff. Let's see where we were. A lot of people have more to say. Boy, you guys never disappoint. These chats are so interesting. Kenneth the Akkadian. Kenneth the Akkadian says, Hollywood executives think the audience is stupid. We've lost all subtext in today's storytelling, just text. I agree. That's why I do think that Denis Villeneuve's Dune and Dune Part 2 are very interesting, because not everything is stated, and because you're not reading after all, you're seeing. It's cinema. So he's trying to underscore his point with what he's showing you, and I think that's important. Flav says, to be fair, this is why Western civilization is dying, because they have rejected God and are instead creating their own idols. Interesting point. And you know what, Flav? I don't think you're wrong. I mean, we're just replacing one with others. But I think humanity has always done that. You know, our gods have always been subject to the whims of charismatic people, and people fall in love with certain things. We've always idolized other people, whether they be teachers, whether they be civic leaders, whether they be politicians, presidents, kings and queens. Major Chai Chai, hello there. Gifted 5 memberships. Why, thank you. New member, Pop Blender. Pop Blender, welcome. Every time I see the word or hear the word or think of the word blender, I think of making a milkshake. I don't know why. Maybe because you use a blender to do it. Jason Webster says, with critical thinking, you present a comprehensive analysis of a subject or idea using all data and evidence, lauding or critiquing that subject or idea. If you critique, you must offer an alternative. Jason, I couldn't agree more. I mean, what I don't understand is why in our modern age are people so adverse to analysis or critique? You know, everybody takes critiques so personally now, or that there's an attack. Like if you're discussing a moral or ethical idea, you should be able to examine all aspects of it. I mean, you know, people asking questions about various issues now immediately get branded something simply by bringing up an alternative point of view. I think everybody should be forced to go back and take high school debate, where people have to debate arguments or make an argument that they don't believe in, but it's an exercise, you know, and you should always try, you know, there's I don't know if you guys have seen it. He's been on a number of YouTube shows. Like he was on, I think, Lex Friedman's channel. He's kind of got a bushy hair. He's a former spy, or maybe he's still a spy. And I think it's Lex who says, if it's the Lex Friedman show, I forget the guy's name. Really articulate, interesting guy. And Lex asks him, what is it that anybody can learn? What have you learned as a spy that's a really important lesson that maybe the audience could benefit from? And he says something that I think is so great, but you'd think that it would be obvious that people would see, just know it or see it, which is, the guy basically says, you should always try and look at things from the other guy's point of view. It's a simple idea, but try and realize, where is that person coming from? You know, it's funny. I've watched people, YouTubers and people that I know that I like. I've watched them, especially people that come from a very specific ideological point of view. I've watched them becoming more radicalized in their own ideology, and it's sort of, and then they start to see everything through the prism of their ideology, and they become less interesting, but they also become, to me, problematic, because they stop thinking about the other person. I mean, to me, the whole point of life is to try and not just understand yourself, but understand the world out there. What's going on out there? You know, and now we're all on the internet, you know, stewing over, oh, I hate this person because of their point of view, and let's cancel them. And it's like, yo, you got to live out there, man. One day you're going to come across that same person that you were screaming for their blood online. You're going to run into them, bump into them at a picnic or an office event or someplace you least expect it. And they're going to be standing in front of you. And they might look at you and go, what the fuck's your problem? And you're going to have to be able to deal with that. And I think that that's something we've forgotten in our society. There should be, I think, a baseline of fundamental respect. Look, I think earned respect is important. But you have to go into a situation always respecting the people that you meet. And look, your continued respect for that person is earned. But if your baseline is to at least give people the benefit of the doubt and respect them until they lose your respect, I think it's a good way to be. Always try and understand who they are and where they're coming from. Joy Johnson says, happy birthday, dude. Indeed. Richard Parsi, I think it's Parsi, has become a new member. Thank you, Richard. Appreciate that. And let's see. I want to get into this final article. And this was published 6 hours ago, not back in 2020. This was published 6 hours ago. So keep in mind, from the first two articles I just read, here's the third and final article of the trilogy. And it was published 4 years later, today, in Medium. All three of these articles came from Medium. I just want to point that out. All three of them. And I did that on purpose because I was digging into Medium's past to find out what was said about Dune. Let's see how much the discourse has changed, if at all. I'll let you be the judges of that. So here it is. Dune Part 2. The story of how to be a colonizer. A deep look at the imperialist themes within the hit space opera. It's funny. This was written by Alex Mel Taylor. And you'd think, after reading the first article I read to you guys, actually, that wasn't from Medium. I'm sorry. I found it because of Medium, but that was from the Paul's personal website, which you can find the link in the description. But 4 years later, somebody wrote this article. Alex Mel Taylor. Denis Villeneuve's Dune series is based on the 1965 book by Frank Herbert of the same name. It's about a neo-feudal society that has regressed away from automation after a war against machines in the distant past called the Butlerian Jihad. Human-powered computation is now a necessary component for every aspect of life, including, most importantly for this space opera, faster-than-light travel. A substance known as spice gives the spacing guild's almost machine-like navigators temporal prescience so that they can do the calculations necessary to make FTL work, and it can only be found on the desert world of Arrakis. Dune involves the royal houses of this feudal society as they attempt to wrest control of Arrakis from its lethal environment, the native population, and each other. Our main protagonist is Paul Atreides, whose family is assigned to stewardship of Arrakis. Blah, 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 blah. Dune Part 2 involves Paul's comeback, etc., etc., etc. The domination is done through violence, yes, but more importantly, the message of Dune is how colonizers convince the colonized to control themselves. Initially, upon watching Dune Part 2, one could be forgiven for thinking this is a modern Lawrence of Arabia, where a white colonizer masters a native people's ways and then organizes them against their oppressors better than they can. Referred to sometimes as the Mighty Whitey trope, this is what some have criticized the original Dune book for. As Noah Berlatsky wrote in The Escapist in 2019 about both David Lynch's 1984 movie and the original book more broadly, in Dune, as in other Mighty Whitey stories, there's a bit more going on. Paul's whiteness makes him an object of worship for the Fremen, but his time with them also gives him access to his full prophetic abilities, ultimately allowing him to defeat the Emperor and become the effective ruler of the universe. Paul's divinity and power comes from his ability to capitalize on the resources and pain of others. On the surface, Mighty Whitey characters are superior because of their whiteness. But dig a little deeper and their powers are borrowed or more accurately stolen. They're godlike because they've appropriated the labor and wealth of others. Paul claims to be racked with guilt because he sees a future in which he leads the Fremen in a path of bloody destruction across the universe, but really the guilt is for his present glory, built on blood and deceit that the story won't and can't quite acknowledge. It's really interesting about this because it's as if these kinds of stories don't exist in other cultures that aren't white. You think there aren't stories like this that happen in Asia, or that happen in India, or that happened in Africa? These are variations on stories that are told by all ethnicities on the planet. It's always funny that because, well, this story was written in the United States by a guy from the Pacific Northwest. It's so they were writing what they knew. Just like J.R.R. Tolkien was writing a myth for England at the time. Just like, any other stories. I feel that whenever anybody writes about this kind of stuff, it's like the Mighty Whitey trope. Well, that comes from where you grew up, where you lived. If you lived in another part of the world, like, say, in India, you would have an entirely different set of stories that you would focus on. And whatever tropes and myths came from those stories, they would be very different. But because of where you live, the Mighty Whitey trope of basically, of course, let's call it Western civilization, where you live and grew up in and have benefited from, it's easy to talk about like Lawrence of Arabia because of the way our world works. But if you lived 1,000 years ago, the stories that you would see would be very different. Just as I'll bet 1,000 years hence, the stories would also be different. And it's never taken into consideration by anybody about the time they live in, where they live, and what else is going on the rest of the planet. Americans act like no one else actually exists on the planet except the way we live here in the United States. And it drives me fucking crazy. It drives me crazy the way Americans, look, at the end of the day, did we participate in the transatlantic slave trade? We did. We also ended it. We fought a war to end it. Many people, white people, died fighting each other over slavery. I know that's an oversimplification, but it was done. And you want to talk about, go back to Good Will Hunting, the modalities of the Southern, you could do all that too, and we can get into it, but it's like, is that forgotten? And you can be cynical about it. Yeah, do we stay a racist country for a long time, which we still are? Sure. Will things get better? They were getting better. I would argue that over the last 15 years, I think we've regressed quite a ways. Anyway, yet again, director Denis Villeneuve's retelling doesn't take the direction. Dune Part 2 isn't a decolonization story at all, despite what the initial first half of the film and its freedom-fighting antics might suggest. It's not even really a colonizer wish fulfillment fantasy, as the original book most certainly was, but a film about how colonizers use ideology to conquer people. This fact is shown most prominently via a mystical prophecy the Atreides family has used, specifically Paul's mother, Lady Jessica, and the forces she represents, to indoctrinate the native Fremen. Jessica is a member of the Bene Gesserit, a pseudo-religious order of all women who have the power to manipulate people with their voices. They are the closest this series gets to true villains, and for a long time, they have been planting the idea amongst the Fremen that a stranger who fits the description of Paul will come and lead them as their mystical Mahdi, the Fremen savior, or Lisan al-Gaib. It's Lisan al-Gaib, the one who will save Arrakis. It's Lisan al-Gaib is how you pronounce it. Multiple characters state over and over again that this prophecy is a fabrication being used to control the Fremen. As one character says, if you want to control people, tell them a Messiah will come, and then they will wait for centuries. Yes, that's true. That's true. Religion has been one of the primary tools of colonization. We don't even have to stray from our own world to understand this fact. It's a sentiment that should be familiar to anyone who has studied Christianity, whose recent history is that of imperial powers spreading this religion to others as a method of control. From the role of Christian missionaries in usurping the Kingdom of Hawaii to state boarding schools in Canada and the United States used to strip Native people of their culture and language. Christianity did not spread naturally around the globe, but was perpetrated by force. As written in Emery's scholarly blog on Christianity's role in African colonization, essentially Christianity was a guise by which Western governments justified the exploitation and conquest of African nations, denouncing the religious practices of Africans as witchcraft and heathenism. European nations sought to convert and then exploit the indigenous peoples of Africa. The use of religion in Dune is a prelude to conquest, and it's a bloodless conquest at that. The Bene Gesserit have refined their violence, moving away from swords and other direct weapons that they leave to the realm of men and focusing instead on the spoken word. Their voice, magic enhanced by spice and consequently stolen from the people of Arrakis, has been weaponized to control the actions of anyone they choose. Resistors don't need to be killed by the Bene Gesserit. They merely need to be commanded to worship, as Chani is when she's forced via the power of Jessica's voice to give Paul Atreides her tears to fulfill some arcane prophecy. Yet, it's not just force alone that makes such indoctrination so insidious. Colonizers cannot be everywhere all the time unless you choose to let a version of them inside your mind, and that requires a far more subtle touch of persuasion and charity. There's a very telling line halfway through Dune Part 2 where Lady Jessica, who has now become a Reverend Mother of the Fremen, telegraphs to the viewer how she will sway the less dogmatic North, and it has everything to do with pinpointing vulnerable people in Fremen society. She says, "Convert the non-believers one by one. Start with the weaker ones, the vulnerable ones, the ones who fear us." Courting vulnerable populations is one of the first things a rising group will do when it tries to gain power, and religion almost always plays a part in this. If we're being cynical, it is the reason why Christianity has so many orphanages and hospitals. In anthropologists David Graeber and David Wengrow's book, The Dawn of Everything, they discuss how the legitimacy of many monarchs might be directly linked to claims of looking after the weak. As they write, it is possible to detect something of this logic in almost all historically documented royal courts, which inevitably attracted those considered freakish or detached. There seems to have been no region of the world, from China to the Andes, where courtly societies did not have such obviously distinctive individuals, and a few monarchs who did not also claim to be the protectors of widows and orphans. First, as Reverend Mother Jessica of Atreides says, you go after the weak and vulnerable. Yeah, as human beings have done since the dawn of time. So Paul feels conflicted by his mother's machinations. For most of the film, he does not want to go to the more religious South because, by the way, that is an invention of the filmmakers, I just want to point out. He does not want to go to the more religious South because he feels he'll be swept up in the messianic image that she has cultivated for him. The Fremen in the North are depicted as being more egalitarian than the feudalism of his world, and he wants to hang on to that image. What earlier, more racist texts would have referred to as going native. Paul clearly sees that the entire mythology... But you know what's so funny about these articles like this? Going native. I mean, those are racist texts. It's also what happens. When you're a technologically advanced society and you come across a society that is less technologically advanced, our technologically advanced society has a bunch of bullshit we have to deal with every day. Bills, cars, taxes, whatever. And if you go native, suddenly all that's swept away. You don't have to deal with that. And you find people that have a simpler way of life. And human beings, you find a simpler way of life and you find happiness and you can leave the rest of the BS behind. I mean, we spend so much of our lives knee deep in a morass of just gobbledygook. And maybe sometimes going native is just going to a place that has less gobbledygook. It doesn't necessarily mean it's racist. It just means it's simpler. And if you look at our civilization, we have overcomplicated everything. I mean, even look at food. Getting good organic food that is just grown without preservatives, without a bunch of bullshit, is difficult and expensive. But if you go native and people are growing their own food out in untouched land, Well, I can see the appeal of that. It's not that it's racist. It's that these people have yet to be subjugated under progress. And I mean, it's going to happen. It's happened all around the world to every single culture ever. And, you know, depending on where you are, you can see worlds that are 100 years behind the world we live in now, if you really want to. And the question is, would you want to live there? Are they better off than we are? Don't know. That's not really for me to say. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the going native trope is a racist trope. It's only a racist trope from a certain point of view. Like everything, I guess, as Ben Kenobi would say. We all know that what goes on. So I'm going to skip down here. It should be noted this person who wrote this article writes them as the Harkonnens, not Harkonnens or Harkonnens. It should be noticed that the Harkonnens are a hyper-violent imperial power. They are also subtextually coded to be white supremacists, or living under a black sun. There is one scene in a massive stadium where at the center, Fade Routha is killing people for his birthday, and the viewer is treated to throngs upon throngs of enraptured white people cheering on this man's brutality. It's not subtle. Well, yeah, but that's because, well, in the movies, Giedi Prime is a black star, basically. And the reason they used infrared film to shoot it is that color has been drained out. I guess when he goes to a different planet, he would have more color. He does not just kill men and women in anger, but carves them up to consume, giving the parts he does not want to his cannibalistic harem. For the Bene Gesserit, there's no difference between Fade Routha and Paul Atreides, and as the movie progresses, we start to understand why. While Fade Routha ruling the Empire would be truly awful, we come to understand that Paul will be no better. He starts to bend under his messianic role, browbeating the Fremen into following him into battle and embracing his newly discovered Harkonnen roots to better take control of the Imperial throne. We must be Harkonnens, he tells his mother coldly. In seconds, any sympathy built up for him is erased. Ultimately, he pushes the Fremen into a holy war across the galaxy, distorting their somewhat egalitarian culture into a theocracy that gives them freedom from oppressors as long as they're willing to be tools for the white colonizers' bid for power. All of this is the point of the story, which, you know, I hope people realize, like the article that this guy has written here, he gets it, and all of these things are part of what Herbert was getting at. That's the whole point of the story. It is not a white savior myth. It is a story about how, as Frank Herbert himself said, charismatic messianic figures perhaps are not the ones that we want to follow, even though it's hard not to. There is no good outcome in Dune, either in part 1 or 2. It is a deeply cynical text in which Paul Atreides realizes that in order to win, he has to fight fire with fire and out-colonize the colonizers. He declares himself emperor, taking the war of all against all on Arrakis and thrusting it into the galaxy. If there is one major criticism of these films, it's not that they are white saviorist texts. The latest outing is a thorough rejection of that perspective, but they are texts that do not see a way past colonization. It is the air Paul Atreides breathes, and its dominance is seen as inevitable, even if its players shift ever so slightly. The Fremen were occupied, and now, under the orders of a new white overlord, they shall occupy the galaxy. But the Bene Gesserit, and even the dominance of royal intrigue, will not change, at least if the book Dune Messiah is any indication. Denis Villeneuve has indicated that he is interested in continuing the story, and based on this movie's success, he most likely will get that chance. The temptation of spectacle might push him to embrace the very Mighty Whitey trope he rejected, but maybe he will continue to toe the line and deconstruct Empire again. Perhaps we might even get a glimpse beyond it. Only the spice can tell us for sure. I can guarantee you, Denis Villeneuve is not going to make Paul some Mighty Whitey savior. That's the point of the story. I mean, it's these cursory glances. I mean, Dune is an entire deconstruction of all of this, and it's just so fascinating. You know, it would have been really interesting to see an Islamic director, maybe somebody based in Iran, because Iran has a great film industry, and there's a lot of really talented directors there. It would have been interesting to see an Iranian director make this movie. Or even why not do an Iranian adaptation of Dune? It would be interesting. I don't know if they could. Maybe the mullahs would, the theocratic government, the theocratic Republic of Iran might have something to say about making Dune. Or it'd be really interesting to see what a Chinese version of Dune might look like. I'd be up for that. I mean, it would be really interesting to see how different cultures tell the same story. But, it's always odd for me to see, like, it's weird because nowadays, I mean, white men, I've now seen myself from being the hero to being the villain. I was the hero, now I'm the villain. Now we're all the villain. But it's because the thing is, I haven't changed. but hey, now I'm the old man shouting at clouds. But it's an interesting world that we live in, and it's bizarre that nowadays so much thought is coming from a very specific kind of place, very academic place, where like the entire Western civilization is bad. And I always want to know, well, okay, but where would you like to take it? Like, is there another civilization on Earth that you would rather have us be now? Like, if Western civilization could disappear tomorrow and be replaced with any form of government that the writers of the first and third article would prefer, what would that government look like? Would it be, it's a socialist utopia, which, by the way, those are two words that will never, ever go together, because human beings are inherently, especially as soon as you have children, and you're going to look at your exceptional children, it doesn't work. Communism and socialism will never work. They will never work because they don't take into consideration what an individual feels like. It seems like a good idea on paper until you accidentally, or not accidentally, until you intentionally put a bunch of people together and try and create a socialist or communist utopia. It will never, ever, ever happen. And why can I say that? Never say never. Because I've been a student of human nature for the half century I've lived on this planet. And I can guarantee you, I've never seen any indication in any of the things that I've done. And to be fair, I haven't done very many things in the grand scheme of things, but I'd like to consider myself a student of people. But I've seen no indication that a socialist or communist society could ever work. And basically now, the people that are purveyors of these societies are a bunch of assholes. and I wouldn't want to live in their civilization even if they could make it work. Because it seems to me like all of it's being born out of laziness. This civilization's too hard. I wish that we all had socialism instead. Yeah. How's that going to work for you? I don't know. But anyway, let me take a gander and see again what you guys are saying, and let me jump in and find out, because there's a lot of good dialogue going. A Major Chai Chai says, can we get an ornithopter build update? Oh man, you know what? This is it. I haven't touched it. I haven't touched it since the weekend. I apologize. This is my Lego ornithopter, and this is only 3 bags out of, I think, 10. 3 bags out of 10. I haven't touched it. You know what? I promise everybody, I will get it done by the end of the weekend, because I want to get that Sopwith camel. So there you go. Garrett Groover says, what is currently your most wanted 4K release right now? For me, it's either Strange Days and Panic Room. Neither got Blu-ray releases in North America. I have had 2 versions of Strange Days on Blu-ray. Both of them are from Germany. But you know what my most eagerly awaited Blu-ray releases are? The Abyss and Aliens. 4K, pardon me. Because mine are been delayed. It's amazing. You go, Disney. There's no market for 4K discs anymore. No, I think, look, I want The Hitcher. I want Near Dark. I want Forbidden Planet. I want Logan's Run. Now, there's a lot of movies I want 4K, but a lot of my favorite movies are out. So, yeah, all of Fincher's movies. I would love Zodiac in 4K, the extended version of Zodiac, which I love. World in Pajamas is back and says, it's interesting to note that Silent Spring by Rachel Carson was released in 1962, and it discusses DDT and pesticides. It was a huge book, and Dune came after in 1965. Environmental science exploded during this period. Yeah, and what have we learned? Environmental science was huge back in the day. Garrett Groover says, I'm curious, with recent 4K releases, what is your favorite James Cameron movie? Hint, it's not Piranha 2 this morning. You know, I think my favorite James Cameron movie is probably The Terminator. The first Terminator. Because, yeah, I mean, Harlan Ellison will be rolling over in his grave. But I was knocked out by Terminator when I saw it. And the wit and the verve and the filmmaking was there. I mean, and then a close second would be Alien. I think in the order they came out, Terminator, Aliens, The Abyss, Terminator 2, Titanic. I mean, True Lies and Titanic and Avatar. I like all of James Cameron's movies. I mean, they all hold. I like the fact that James Cameron is a total populist. He's making movies for everybody, but at the same time, he's a rabid technologist. And I love that he's been pushing the technology of the industry and filmmaking technology. I also love the fact that he's a romantic at heart. He's a total romantic. I mean, Terminator's got a romance at its center. Aliens is a movie about the greatness of motherhood, the strength that only a woman can have. You know, with the bond, the matriarchal bond. You know, and The Abyss. I mean, The Abyss is about two characters that are getting a divorce and they hate each other, and through alien intervention and surviving in an unsurvivable situation, they find their love again. I mean, what's not to love? And Terminator 2 again, you know, a romance in a way. True Lies, married couple rediscovers the fire in their relationship. He's the best. I love James Cameron. Darth Plato says Muad'Dib versus Ming the Merciless. It's on. Tom Jr. Jackson says, I think you missed Ria Lavi's super chat, boss. I haven't. There's so many I haven't gone back to yet, but I will go back. Lipstick Train Face says, that guy on Lex's show also said he's leaving the country by 2027, which freaks me out. Yes, so he was on. Yeah, he does say that. He does say that. Yeah, he's leaving the country, and I can see why. I mean, make no mistake, we're being played. We're being played by many bad actors out there that have completely undermined the United States. We've been undermined on every level. Social media was the tool that bad actors have used, and we can watch it happen. You know, hopefully cooler heads will prevail. Yeah, it freaked me out too, which is unfortunate because, you know, you can't defeat the United States militarily. You can't. But you can take it apart from within. I mean, this is textbook 101. How many books and movies have told us this? It's funny. Leave the World Behind on Netflix. You know, based on a novel, but you get to the end of that movie and it's like that's pretty much how it would happen. You know, it's very funny because I have no problem with people, immigrants that want to come into the United States. But the amount of unchecked immigration that's happening, if I was going to destabilize the United States, it would be so easy to get a fifth column in here. Well, that usually says it comes from within. But, I mean, we could have a Red Dawn style. Look, at people are shooting at our own infrastructure. We don't even know why. We are so unprepared. In a weekend, the United States could be brought to its knees, and we wouldn't even know what hit us. And people are like arguing over, hey, you're racist. You know, it's like, look, what's going on, the amount of people that have come into this country that we have no idea what they're doing. It's not the fact that you want to keep immigrants out of the United States. It makes us, I mean, that kind of diversity is what built this nation. But unchecked immigration in an age where so many people around the world have a grudge against the United States, and the fact that our own population is probably less educated. I mean, we had public schools. We had this great public school system that arose, and now it's crumbled into ideological gobbledygook. And it's just, I don't know, man. So lipstick train face, yeah, it's probably pretty crazy. Hunter Becknell says Andrew. Oh, Andrew Bustamante is the guy. Okay, Andrew Bustamante. That's his name, Andrew Bustamante. It's true. Unlimited Power says I watched Spaceballs for the first time. It was great. It is great. I like that you watched Spaceballs for the first time. Ria Lavi, here's your super chat, says Aristotle said a tragedy should make the audience feel pity and fear and help reach catharsis. Why don't more people in Hollywood study his poetics? You'd think that everybody would be studying poetics. People used to. I think if you ask the people like Gene Roddenberry and some of the writers on the original Star Trek, they would be able to tell you something about poetics. But yeah. A World in Pajamas, Tracy said, it's also good to see you, Rob, but I can't stay up long. Well, it's good to see you too. I'm sorry. I've kept you up. But thanks you. I've always a pleasure to have you here. We have letters. I've got letters. You want me to read some letters? I got them. I got some letters. And this is a good one. A fan with no name who has written in. Now, this is a topical letter. This is a good one. A fan with no name. Why can't I find the fan with no names? Let's see. Let me get it in here. And I know it went somewhere. I just sent the letter. I sent it somewhere. Damn it. Janet, where did it go? Where did your letter go? Here it is. Found it. Let's see if I can open it because I'm taxing my computer with, here it is. Here is a fan with no name's letter. The 2D Problem, a song of Benioff and Weiss. Hello again, Rob. I've previously expressed how much I enjoy your movie and book recommendations. With the Three Body Problem series right around the corner, I figured I would dive right in to Cixin Liu's the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy. After finishing Death's End, I watched the trailer for Netflix's Three Body Problem for the first time. It brought a teardrop to my eye. I'll cut right to the chase. This series was amazing. Maybe I'm just a basic imagination connoisseur, but I haven't been as eager to turn the page since reading A Song of Ice and Fire. And boy, isn't it convenient. The same duo who enjoyed the all-time highs and lows of adapting and transforming a Game of Thrones into a pop culture powerhouse are now throwing their hat into the existential sci-fi ring. Let's rewind to when the series was first announced and D&D were set to helm the project. I didn't know anything about the three-body problem, but after spending the better part of a decade reading A Song of Ice and Fire, watching Game of Thrones, and chasing Alice down the rabbit hole of book theories, I sure as hell know Benioff and Weiss. Maybe to your surprise, but I was optimistic about this new series. I think it gets lost in the hate for how the series ended, but the two showrunners deserve all the credit in the world for both their vision and adaptation of Martin's finished books. I 100% agree. The problem with Game of Thrones happened when there was no more books to adapt. I completely agree with that. Personally, I think the first season is the apex for adapting source material while being both faithful and expanding on the characters and themes. Some of my favorite additions to the season were Ned telling Jon, "We'll talk about your mother the next time we meet," Littlefinger's "Chaos is a ladder" monologue, and Robert and Cersei's private discussion of why their marriage failed. These few examples show that the two-man team have real chops in the fleshing out of both the overall story and adding to each character. My hindsight 2020 on the series as a whole is pretty straightforward. They were tired of Westeros, and when they ran out of source material, they needed to make the decision, we can't wait for these books, we need to tell our own story. Instead, we got a half-ass attempt to fill in the blanks and wrap things up where George R.R. Martin probably said things end. The reality is, they should have handed off the baton to passionate writers and prolonged the series a couple more seasons. Can you imagine the subscriber surge after Game of Thrones season 10 trailer would end with only on HBO Max or whatever uninspired title the streamer had that week. As the series devolved into a childish ending, my biggest problems weren't even the nonsensical plot turns. In the end, Benioff and Weiss failed to grasp the many messages of A Song of Ice and Fire. I completely agree. While we don't have George's final product to analyze and dissect, let's face it, we never will, I think it's safe to say we can conclude from both the books as well as Martin being an outspoken feminist and Vietnam War opposer that his magnum opus is an anti-war and anti-patriarchy story. Whether someone is a lover or hater of the series finale, can you name one time someone commented on these themes? Personally, my favorite idea Martin explores is the power dynamic in which history is perceived. At its best, we see this when we're introduced to Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer. Later on, we get one of the best scenes of the show where Jaime's true intentions are revealed in why he killed the Mad King. For lack of a better term, the history of Westeros plays ambiguous. We're not sure what story to trust because descriptions come from the point of views of characters or even institutional powers with real-world-like political biases and motivations. Side note, this is why I think the turn of Dany was so underwhelming. She should have been put in a position where the viewer contemplates, is she right for burning it down or is she mad? We just got #Mad Queen alert. Benioff and Weiss clearly have immense talent and a great eye for stories. But do they get it? When I started reading The Three-Body Problem, my excitement for the show was through the roof. I love the story, but I did see the potential in some improvements in an adaptation. In particular, I think the characters in The Three-Body Problem aren't nearly as fleshed out as the characters that we later meet in Dark Forest and Death's End. But after finishing and reflecting on some of the themes, I once again have to ask myself, do D&D get it? There are natural similarities between a Remembrance of Earth's Past and Shares to A Song of Ice and Fire that I think Benioff and Weiss will excel at. The most obvious comparison is the subverting of expectations. Fans of Game of Thrones know that when George R.R. Martin first conceived the character of Ned Stark, despite how much he loved him, he famously knew he was going to kill him off because he wanted readers to feel the weight of the real-world implications instead of the traditional fantasy tropes of the pure-hearted hero who saves the day. Without giving anything away, throughout this series, I felt Cixin Liu achieved the same feat multiple times in many different scenarios. Along with subverting genre expectations, I feel that Earth's Remembrance or Remembrance of Earth's Past echoes the idea of how historical figures are perceived throughout time as well. Again, without spoiling for the uninitiated, a major recurring theme throughout Cixin Liu's epic sci-fi is humanity's bell curve view of characters, policies, and even technologies. Certain characters are even viewed as highly messiah-like figures to eventually being tried for crimes against humanity. The important thing to note is each character never changes their point of view or ideas, but humanity changes how they perceive those characters. In the wake of a global pandemic, this is an idea I feel the series has to touch on. A global response which requires multiple world governments to work in unison to both combat this looming problem while also placating to the public's reactionary nature is something I believe viewers will respond to. Of course, I want to see the large set pieces and the high concept theories played out on screen in which Cixin Liu uses the narrative as a vehicle to explore. But to me, humanity's cyclical struggle throughout this conflict is the real message most individuals can take away from the story. For those who are curious in what the Earth's Remembrance trilogy might be, humor my elevator pitch for each book. The Three-Body Problem reads like Seven, meaning David Fincher's Seven, on a global scale. Dark Forest, probably my favorite of the series, reads like Death Note on a cosmic scale. And Death's End is the epilogue to Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey. Maybe these are unreal expectations I have for the adaptation, but like everything else, I'm going to go in cautiously optimistic and try and judge the content for what it is. Anyway, Rob, thank you for once again the book Anyway, Rob, thank you once again for the book recommendations. Right now, I'm continuing to beat the sci-fi drum as I read Arthur C. Clarke's 2001: A Space Odyssey. I think I need to change up the genre in which I read for a little while. You've mentioned Glamorama a couple of times. That is Bret Easton Ellis's magnum opus. Look, man, I'm a huge Bret Easton Ellis fan, and at the time, Glamorama was clearly his best book. You've mentioned Glamorama a couple of times, and I'm thinking of tackling that or Pictures at a Revolution to supplement my French New Wave Italian neorealism movie watching. Actually, you know what? Read Donna Tartt's The Secret History. You want to change of pace? Go read that. Donna Tartt's The Secret History. It is not science fiction, but it's got a little of that Italian neorealist thing going on. What are your thoughts and expectations for D&D's The Three-Body Problem? What are your thoughts on the book series? Which one was your favorite? Will the teardrop the trailer gave me be one of beauty or represent looming destruction? As always, Rob, thank you for taking the time to read my letters. P.S. I have a newfound respect for the elegance in which you read these. I just started reading children's books to my 4-month-old every night, and I jumble every other word. Be seeing you, the fan with no name. By the way, Be seeing you, for those of you who've never seen The Prisoner, Imprint in Australia is releasing a box set of The Prisoner episodes. They've been out of print for a while, and they look gorgeous on Blu-ray. I'm not sure if they're all region or only region B, but good stuff. Well, the fan with no name. So for those of you who don't know, first of all, The Three-Body Problem was written by, I can't pronounce, Shizhen Liu, or it's Liu Shizhen Liu. It's Chinese. My pronunciation, I don't know anything about Chinese, so it's terrible. I can even conjugate verbs in Spanish, but I can't. Chinese, I can't even. But anyway, the science fiction author who wrote The Wandering Earth that the movie was based on wrote these books. They have been previously adapted, at least the first book, The Three-Body Problem. They have been adapted for Chinese television in a 30-episode series that you can watch for free on the Tencent channel on YouTube. I watched the whole series. I thought it was a fairly great adaptation of the books. Here's the thing, though. It's very Asian and very Chinese in its presentation, so Western audiences, and I would say the first 10 episodes are rather glacially paced, and it takes a little bit of getting used to. I mean, it doesn't bother me, but a lot of other people are going to be turned off by it. They're going to be like, what is this? Why is it taking so long? You have to go into it with a different mindset. Understand that you're going to watch something that's being presented to you in a way that you're not used to. Just try it. Now, the Three-Body Problem and then the Dark Forest and Death's End, it's a gigantic, sprawling, epic, hard science fiction story. My favorite book's probably, I think, Dark Forest, but I mean, maybe it's the first one, only because when I read the first one for the first time, actually I've read it twice, I didn't know what it was. I was like, this won the Hugo Award. Like, this was like 12 years ago or something. It hadn't reached the kind of status it has now, so it was wild to go back and read it and be like, what is this? Really, really interesting ideas. In a nutshell, for those of you who don't know about the Three-Body Problem, is a physics. It's an astronomical physics problem. But I don't want to. It's kind of fun to discover what three bodies you're talking about and what the problem actually is. But in a nutshell, I don't even want to. I can't. I'd rather. It's going to be on. Did it debut yesterday or something? Since it's brand new, and if you don't know what the Three-Body Problem is, and you're a fan of heady sci-fi, you've got the Chinese show to watch, and you've now got Weiss and Benioff's adaptation for Netflix. I'm not going to answer the question. I'm not going to ask what I think is anything, because I don't want to ruin it because it's here. You know, it's now here, and a lot of people haven't seen the three-body problem. It's not like Dune, although it is kind of like Dune because the book's been around for a long time. This is interesting. So this one comes from Bert Garcia. Bert Garcia sent me this article. Discovery still matched Star Trek The Next Generation's record with fewer seasons. Star Trek Discovery may only have 5 seasons by the time it ends, but the show still managed to match a record first set by Star Trek The Next Generation. Oh, joy. This viewer who sent me this is pissed about this article, so let's see what he's talking about. Despite running only 5 seasons, Star Trek Discovery has still managed to match a record set by Star Trek The Next Generation. Discovery was the first modern live-action Star Trek series to premiere in 2017, over a decade after Star Trek Enterprise was canceled in 2005. The show kicked up the new franchise renaissance, inspiring spin-offs like Star Trek Strange New Worlds and paving the way for others like Star Trek Lower Decks and Star Trek Picard. In March 2023, Paramount Plus canceled Discovery, announcing that the upcoming Season 5 would be the show's last. While 5 seasons is a fairly impressive run for a TV show, especially in the era of streaming, Discovery is actually on the shorter side when compared to the legacy Star Trek shows. Many classic Star Trek series ran for 7 seasons, a trend that was started by Star Trek The Next Generation and continued throughout the 1990s era of the franchise. Like most of the recent Star Trek TV shows, Discovery will not be getting 7 seasons, but unlike its sister shows, the series did manage to have one thing in common with The Next Generation in terms of length. Where is this article going? With the premiere of Star Trek Discovery Season 5 in April 2024, the show will have officially been in production for 7 years, just like The Next Generation was in the late 80s, early 90s. This means that Discovery has matched The Next Generation and other legacy Star Trek shows in production time, if not in the number of seasons. Although Discovery Season 5 is officially finished filming in 2023, the series premiering in 2024 adds the right amount of length to the official production timeline to clinch the 7-year record. Despite Discovery getting... Oh my God. Okay. First of all, let me just go back and I'm going to I don't even know who wrote this article. Dana Hansen. This was published 12 hours ago. Dana Hansen wrote this and somebody just sent this to me. Let me say... Let me be clear, Dana. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about. You want to know why? And let me get back to our reader's letter. Let me read the. I have a feeling. I haven't read his letter. I have a feeling I know where he's going with this. So we're going back to Bert Garcia's letter. The first thing he said in the letter was read this art. It was like, give me the article. So that was the article. Now we get to what Bert Garcia is writing about, and I already know what you're going to say, but I'm going to read what you're going to say, Bert. Why is this article trying to gaslight us into believing that Star Trek Discovery had the same run as Next Generation? Next Generation, DS9, and Voyager all had more than 170 episodes in their 7-season run. Discovery only did 65 episodes in 5 seasons over 7 years, even though it took them 7 years to complete. The original series, 79 episodes, and Enterprise, 98 episodes, had more episodes in their shorter run. Oh my God. Dana, look, I don't know you, but give me a break. You don't say anything about that each Star Trek series before Discovery had double the amount of episodes per season. Double. And was infinitely better than any of Discovery. It's amazing. It's amazing Star Trek Discovery got 5 seasons. And yeah, you are trying to gaslight people because what you're saying is disingenuous. 65 episodes. The original series had 79 in 3 years. 79 in 3 years. Discovery had 7 years to do less episodes, and it's still 5 seasons of gobbledygook, of crying, of ridiculousness. I still couldn't tell you the name of the redhead blonde, the redhead blonde, the redhead on the bridge. What are the names of the bridge crew? What is their rank? If Michael Burnham isn't, doing everything on the ship, who's in second besides Saru? Who takes command? Does Stamets take command? Do we ever see Stamets take command the way Scotty? I mean, unbelievable. Yeah, you know what, Bert? I'm with you, buddy. First of all, I want to thank you for writing in, and that's some gaslighting. That is some gaslighting. Wow. What a dumb article. What a stupid article. Wow. This one comes from Just James. Just James says, has Warner Brothers lost its way? 1998. Hi, Rob. I was just cleaning out my father's shed, and I found this in a stack of old newspapers dated January 26, 1998. Just replace Warner Brothers with Marvel Sony, and it's strangely familiar. This is an article, Has Warner Brothers Lost Its Way? Scripts, budgets blamed for bad film year. Well, you've got Batman and Robin is there, and it looks like LA Confidential and Contact, which are not bad. So let me read this article. Halfway through the box office disaster, The Postman, by the way, I love The Postman, I don't care what anyone says, the title character tries to perk up a disconsolate populace with one rallying cry. Stuff's getting better. True, it lacks pizzazz, but it's the best the ragtag group can hope for. The same can be said for Warner Brothers, a studio reeling from a string of duds capped by The Postman, which cost more than $80 million, not counting marketing costs, and has only earned about $17 million since its Christmas Day opening. Other disappointments last year involved such star vehicles as Father's Day with Billy Crystal and Robin Williams, Mad City with Dustin Hoffman and John Travolta, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, directed by Clint Eastwood, Conspiracy Theory with Mel Gibson and Julia Roberts, and The Devil's Advocate with Al Pacino and Keanu Reeves performed below expectations. But you know what? That movie's great. Even Batman and Robin at $107 million, the studio's top performer, fell short of its estimated $150 million budget, I'll say, and Contact with Jodie Foster grossed $101 million but cost $90. Doesn't matter, don't care, it's still great. But yeah, the more things change, the more they stay the same. But I want to thank you for writing in, and where'd you get that article? That's pretty neat. Julian Mushkin sends in a tip and says, hey, Rob, I regret I had to miss the last members chat as I really wanted to share some of my thoughts about Dune Part 2. But frankly, I'm sure that 7 minutes would only scratch the surface. I must, perforce, write a letter to the show. Cheers, please do. If you want to write a letter, write down below, postgeeksingularity.com, send it to me. B. Depp says, have you checked out the first 2 episodes of Manhunt yet? I'm going to go after the stream. Happy birthday, by the way. That joke, it's a joke that refuses to die. I have not watched any of Manhunt. Rory Grimshaw said, hey, Rob, did you see the SpaceX Starship test flight? I did. So, for those of you who don't know, putting your whatever feelings you might have about Elon Musk aside, they launched the 3rd Starship test. Starship is by far the largest rocket that we've ever launched. It lasted for an hour before burning up, not making it home. But that hour was a spectacular success by any metric. Sure, they might have lost the booster, and, you're building the biggest rocket. People forget, before we had Mercury, before we had Gemini, before we had Apollo, we had a lot of rockets that blew up on the launch pad. Now people seem to forget that. What Elon Musk and his team at SpaceX have done is revolutionary. Can't take it away from them. So, yeah, amazing stuff. JW Baseman is a new imagination connoisseur. New member, thank you. Appreciate that. So, Rory, what SpaceX is doing is amazing. Our friend Gio Diaz is here. 7 years. A lot of people go to school for 7 years. Yeah, they're called doctors. I need to I need to be a journalist. Clearly, they'll hire anyone. 1001 Johnny comes to us and says, Rob, good evening. I learned yesterday that Ultraman Blazer the movie will have 2 special premieres this week in Thailand. First, in this Sunday in Bangkok. I'll be in Bangkok, but I'll be getting on a plane. I hope daylight savings was good for everyone. Captain Robert April, to add to the article, says something very true. 7 years to produce a third as many episodes at 3 times the cost. Great job, Discovery. You're not wrong, Captain Robert April. David the Burly Reader became a new member of the channel. David, thank you. Thanks for becoming a new member of the channel. I appreciate that. Yes, sir. Let's see where I'm at. I want to make sure I don't miss anyone's calls. So, Gio Diaz, I got you. Brian Erdy. You've reminded me of something. Brian Erdy. Right here. Brian Erdy, right here. So, hang on. Wait. So Brian Erdy, who's a reader of this channel, let me read this. Brian Erdy, who's a new member of the PGS. I wanted to share a book with you. When the pandemic began in March of 2020, I was looking to pass the time any way I could. I just purchased an iPad Pro and an Apple Pencil, so I thought I would do some digital artwork. I was an art major before I discovered video production, so I do have some skills and wanted to do something fun, unique, and different. As I was pondering ideas, I kept coming back to one in particular. I kept thinking about Sunday newspaper comics. 6 panels, all color. More specifically, what would a Jaws newspaper strip look like? I kept thinking about Mrs. Kittner and Chief Brody's exchange, but having it go haywire. From there, just how many Jaws jokes could I do? I ended up creating 10 of them and started posting them in various Jaws Facebook groups. The response? Well, better than I could have dreamed of. The recurring theme was more. I was tapped out of ideas for Jaws, so I moved on to Romero's Day of the Dead. I did almost 30 of those. Then I did Star Trek, the motion picture, through Star Trek 4, The Thing, Planet of the Apes, and Dune. I received enough online encouragement to resurrect something I used to do in the 90s, a series called Brian's House of Waffles. I was banging out cartoons on an almost daily basis, and no topic was off limits. Politics, bad movie pitches, great finds at Aldi, and more. Between 2020 and 2022, I produced over 400 cartoons. Last year, a friend of mine from high school sent me a package. He works as a printer, and he totally blew my mind by compiling all of my cartoons in a nicely produced book. Seriously, one of the nicest things anyone has ever done for me. I asked him if we could tweak a few things and do a small run of 500 books. The enclosed book is what we came up with. I sold them directly on Facebook, and what do you know? I almost sold out. I hope you can take a few and browse through the book, especially the 40 cartoons based around the motion picture, Wrath of Khan, Search for Spock, and Voyage Home. If anyone would appreciate my comic sensibilities, it would be you. Fun fact, Darren Doctorman actually messaged me on a correction on one of my Wrath of Khan strips, which is ironic, as Inglorious Trexperts is how I discovered you. Anyway, I hope you enjoy the book. Brian, I love this book. Here it is. And from the godfather of pop culture, you can't spell nerdy without Erdy, because it's Brian Erdy. Here's his book, House of Waffles, and it's pretty hilarious. I mean, this is the thing that got me. First of all, everyone knows Dawn of the Dead is one of my favorite movies of all time. These Day of the Dead strips are hilarious, and there's a lot of them. I was like, oh my God, somebody's a big Romero fan like me. These Jaws strips are hilarious. These Superman strips are hilarious. So there are some of them. And let me read on the back. You can't spell nerdy without Erdy. Who is the creator of Brian's House of Waffles? Dad, film critic, producer, writer, artist, cartoonist, 4-time Emmy winner, lover of Diet Pepsi. Dude, Coke, Diet Coke all the way. And pizza. Proud son of Fred and Joan, godfather of pop culture. Brian Erdy is a 4-time Emmy Award-winning broadcast film critic, producer, and editor, originally from Columbus, Ohio. He's written for and appeared on NBC, CBS, Inside Cable, Gannett News, and Cox Media Group. Getting his start in 2003 as Dr. DVD on CD 102.5. Brian quickly moved online and into broadcast television. He writes, shoots, and edits all of his own packages. As a young boy in his suburban Ohio hometown, Brian was well known as a unique cartoonist and filmmaker during the 1980s and 90s. Brian continues to regularly create and share his own videos and cartoons on various social media platforms, and this collection highlights some of his best and oddest cartoons, going back as far as 1991 and as recent as 2022. This book's a lot of fun, and if you still got some, go look up Brian Erdy. That's E-R-D-Y, right? Yeah. E-R-D-Y. And yes, now, I'll tell you something else. So he didn't just send me this book. He sent me, where did I put the box? Well, he sent me these. He sent me these Ray-Bans. Now, they had Facebook and Meta all over them too. And I'm like, what are these? These are pretty badass. I got to put these on. These are Ray-Bans that, of course, have an HD camera in them. It's like Google Glass. So I can piss people off. I have not turned these on. I have not, but these are sunglasses. I love Ray-Bans. I love Ray-Bans. Ray-Bans are my, I still rock the Wayfarers. The risky business Tom Cruise glasses, but these have a camera in them. And he just included it in this box with his book. I mean, the book's cool, but, to get these, I was like, oh my God, dude, this is amazing. I mean, these are not inexpensive. So I have not turned them on yet or juiced them up, but I've been reading the instructions about how to use them, which is pretty amazing. And I was like, man, why would he send me these? And then, of course, there's a PS on his letter. And the PS says, P.S. My girlfriend is a Meta bigwig, and we got tons of cool swag. I thought I'd share some with you. I can only imagine if you could just throw me those Ray-Bans, man. I can't even imagine what kind of cool swag you got. Do you get to live in a virtual world knowing a bigwig at Meta? Brian, thank you so much. I very much appreciate you. Thank you for the gift. Thank you for the package of greatness. But most importantly, I live for this stuff. I love when people make things. And by the way, here's a picture of Brian on the back, so you can see him. He's wearing, by the way, I just want to point out that if you're a Star Trek fan, he's wearing the proper shirt. Okay? Just saying. So Brian, thank you. Some of this stuff's really funny, actually. Pocket Patriot Pals. It's... Okay, I guess you have to grow up in a time when you're learning like CPR. Do you remember that? And you'd have the CPR, the training doll. Do you remember this? And of course, you had to shake the doll, and it was Annie. And you'd go, Annie, are you okay? You call 911. I'm starting CPR. And this is just funny. This is a little orphan Annie and a dog. Annie, are you okay? I don't know. Maybe you had to be there. Anyway, I love this book. Brian Erdy, go look him up on Facebook. Buy this. He is the godfather of pop culture, self-proclaimed, but I'll give him that. So thank you, Brian. I very much appreciate it. I've had the thing sitting next to me. Brian Erdy says that. Oh yes, he sent in a super chat. Brian Erdy says, I'd never seen Game of Thrones, but a friend who knows me very well suggested I just watch the show open and I would be hooked. That music and those images, he was 100% right. It's true. He was, and it was great. So listen, everybody, I am going to bring this chat to an end. I hope everybody enjoyed this show. This was a lot of fun to do. Maybe it got a little boring, But, I've been seeing all these people between people talking about where are all the blank blank people or whatever people that aren't in Shogun. I'm like, come on, man. The world was not an incredibly diverse place in the 1600s. I'm just saying. You had to go to different parts of the world to see different kinds of people. We didn't have air travel then. And if we did, it was aliens. So I'm just saying. But, by the way, Shogun is a banger. And I don't just mean the final scene of the last episode. I love it. But anyway, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. There will be no member call tomorrow. And there is not going to be Let's Get Physical Media this week because Dieter is unavailable. And I will be moving. Elizabeth's daughter is moving back from Hollywood into the house here, moving back home after a couple of 3 years, 2 years, only because she's going to start going back to school again, like Elizabeth. Elizabeth, of course, is getting her master's degree finally, her MFA in fine art. She's having her final art show. If you go to my Facebook page, Robert Meyer Burnett, you can see if you want to come to her art show. It's at the Claremont Colleges. I don't know the date, like April 14th, maybe? Sometime around tax day. Something like that. But anyway, there you go. I want to thank Tom Jr. Jackson for moderating, for being the greatest moderator ever. So thank you, Tom Jr. Jackson. You can go to bed early tonight. And there is no Midnight Musing. Someone asked about Midnight Musing. It's not like we haven't canceled the show or anything like that. Just haven't been able to put it together. People like Lael was at a convention last week in Washington, D.C. Has been doing other stuff, but we'll be around. We will be back. It's not a canceled show. And Dave Parker and I want to say this. Dave Parker, Midnight Metal, his movie, new movie, actually, let me get the name of this, because Dave Parker's new film that he directed in a foreign country, no less, is now available on, I think it debuted on Tubi today or yesterday. Let's see. Hang on. Let me get this information for you. And because I know it's up there. Okay. The movie's called You Shouldn't Have Let Me In. And You Shouldn't Have Let Me In. Hills Run Red director returns with a new Tubi vampire movie. So check that out. You Shouldn't Have Let Me In. And so Dave Parker, we're not just slouch YouTube pundits here. We actually make stuff. And yeah, you can go see that. So it's on Tubi. You Shouldn't Have Let Me In. Dave Parker's new vampire movie. We're talking about he talked about doing a Midnight Metal, maybe even tomorrow night, to promote the movie, to talk about the making of the movie. I think that'd be a lot of fun. And I will say this. Everyone knows that we're talking about the Nathan Heller, our audio drama. Tell you a little bit of update on the audio drama. I received the outline of all 10 episodes from Max Allen Collins. I'm so excited about it. I brought on another cast member. It's going to be a pretty star-studded cast if you're a fan of actors, especially actors that have been in a lot of things that pertain to us. I'll give you a hint. I'm not going to say who this actor is, but I've worked with them before on another show. On a show that's on a streaming service. And I'll tell you who this actor is going to play. This actor is going to play Elliot Ness, the character that Kevin Costner played in The Untouchables. Elliot Ness, Al Capone, and Frank Nitti are characters in our audio drama. And this actor will be playing Elliot Ness and probably contributing other voices as well. And we're starting production soon. We're launching the crowdfunding campaign in the next couple weeks. We're just making everything, we're setting up and doing it correctly and waiting for some artwork. Dave Dorman, if you know him, Star Wars artist, he is painting. He did the covers for like Dark Horse's Dark Empire. He's painting our key art, the Nathan Heller key art. And we're signing up more actors, and it's pretty great. So when we launch our crowdfunding campaign, I'm really excited about it. So I can tell you it's now definitively, it's 10 episodes long. and it is based on Max Allan Collins' first Nathan Heller novel. The novel's called True Detective, which obviously that title was taken. So the series that we're doing is called True Noir, the Nathan Heller case books, and the first story deals with this is true, by the way, the mayor of Chicago in 1933, Anton Cermak, was assassinated. I kid you not. So the Nathan Heller stories surround he's a fictional detective, and the story that he's dealing with is fictional, but he's dealing with real people. So it's a fictional character that but deals with real historical incidents. And the first episode of the audio drama is surrounding the assassination of Mayor Anton Cermak. It's going to be 10 episodes long, and Todd Stashwick, Liam Shaw from Picard Season 3, and of course played Deacon in 12 Monkeys and a million other things that he was in. He is the lead, and there's going to be a lot of really exciting actors that you all know playing roles in this audio drama. And when people say what kind of an audio drama is it? It's a movie, but without the pictures. So it's going to sound like a full-blown audio presentation. It's going to sound like a movie. You're going to listen to it and it's going to be like, oh my God. And if all things go correct and we stick to the plan, we will be having a big debut of it at the San Diego Comic-Con, probably in a movie theater. My dream is to have everybody come into a movie theater, we introduce it, and we turn off the lights. Now, we can't turn the exit lights off, but the screen, no lights, and it's going to be pitch black, and we'll play the first 2 episodes at San Diego Comic-Con this year. So if you donate to the crowd fund, you would immediately, if you're going to be at Comic-Con, would be able to just come to the screening. And we're going to have a party afterwards, probably at a bar. So it's going to be pretty fun. And we're going to launch the crowdfunding campaign. I don't know. I have no idea how we're going to do with the crowdfunding campaign, but the more money we make, the better are the actors that we can hire and pay for. And there's really exciting people. I'm really excited about this thing, I got to tell you. So that's happening. Dave Parker's movie, You Shouldn't Have Let Me In, is on Tubi now. So check that out, everybody. And on that note, actually, and thanks everybody for tonight, for generously supporting the channel via tips and super chats and all that. You'll see me all weekend long streaming, even though I won't be here for Let's Get Physical Media, which is a shame because I have a stack of discs, but maybe it'll allow me to get Aliens and fucking The Abyss in 4K, which this is the third. Conan, The Abyss, and Aliens. I was boned by Amazon 3 in a row, which unacceptable. Anyway, I did not say Kevin Costner. No, Kevin Costner is not. He's not playing Elliot Ness, but Kevin Costner did play Elliot Ness in The Untouchables, and they're just like Robert De Niro played Al Capone. And I forget who played the guy who played Frank Nitti. Why am I drawing a blank on his name? I love the guy who played Frank Nitti. But there you go. And no, this is not like an old-time radio drama. This is mixed in 5 point. When we drop the proof of concept, and the proof of concept we just put together quickly because I wanted to get people a taste of what we were trying to do, you'll be able to download the file in both 2-channel stereo and 5.1 audio. One of our stretch goals is it's going to be mixed in Dolby Atmos, and we will be releasing, one of the perks is a Blu-ray. I don't know if you guys know Super Deluxe Editions. Bob Clearmountain's company that remasters albums in Dolby Atmos and 5.1. One of the stretch goals will be Dolby Atmos mixes. So you're going to get a 2-channel stereo mix, 5.1 mix, and a Dolby Atmos mix on the Blu-ray. And then there's also video footage, and you're going to see all kinds of stuff that we shot for the campaign. It's pretty neat. Anyway, Al Renshaw says, am I still taking super chats? Well, I was going to jump off, but if you want to send it a super chat before I jump off, I could do that. Billy Drago, right, was Frank Nitti. Billy Drago. And I went to a party at Billy Drago's house once, and his wife was delightful. He and his wife were delightful. Back in I'll tell you when I went to Billy Drago's house. I went to Billy Drago's house when my old roommate, Mitch Coughlin, was working on Alien 3. So was that 1990? That's on with a girl named Laura Morris. So, yeah. Anyway, so I can just keep going. I'm going to end this because I have to go pick up Zoe's other daughter, Sophie. So, on that note, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, this time, I really am out of here. Have a better night.